I always loved how the forest in Wyoming smelled at night. Sharp pine, cold rocks, and a faint hint of burning wood that hung in the air even after the fire went out. That first evening near Silver Creek Lake, though every familiar smell seemed mixed with something sour and electric, like the woods themselves were uneasy. My father had picked the campsite because it was peaceful. We were miles from the closest trailhead, hidden against a rough tree line just below the tree line where the forest thinned out. No sound of cars, no glow from cabins or RV parks. Only the lake breathing quietly in the dark and a million tiny stars above. We spent the evening as usual, hanging tarps, putting up the food away from animals, swapping the same old stories until they felt new again. By the time the last ember faded, Emily was yawning, Jake was halfway through his whiskey, telling a soft story, and Dad was already heading to his tent. I wasn't tired yet. I said it was the high elevation, but the real reason was simpler. Such quiet can be addictive. I stayed sitting by the fire ring alone until the coals turned gray and the sky shifted to a deep steel blue. My watch read 1:17 when I finally crawled into my small dome tent, just a few steps from camp. The nylon made a soft crackling sound as I zipped the door shut, rolled onto my back, and listened. At first, it was only the wind shaking spruce branches. Steady, polite, predictable. Then, after about 10 or 15 minutes, a new sound mixed with the breeze. A slow, heavy breath at ground level, moving along the back wall of my tent. It paused, then moved again, like whatever was outside was trying to memorize my scent. I pictured a black bear sniffing the air, testing for food, and my muscles tightened until my knees hurt against the sleeping pad. The sniffing faded, but the forest didn't settle. I heard a crunch near the cold fire pit, then a slow scrape, wood on gravel, unhurried. The noise circled wide, going past Dad's tent, then Emily's and Jake's, and finally mine, making a ring in the pine needles and dust. My mind searched for explanations. Maybe an elk rubbing antlers, maybe wind moving a loose branch. But each idea fell apart when the footsteps returned, walking uneven and upright, stopping just inches from my door. Suddenly, the night exploded white, like a camera flash, close enough to make my shadow jump sharp and black on the tent's inside walls. I squeezed my eyes shut, confused and waiting for the footsteps to move away, for any sign the person was still there. Nothing moved. The air felt like a vacuum, completely still. Then, the tent fabric next to my hip bent inward, pushed slowly and firmly by a weight. Not a paw too wide, too exact. Whoever it was settled down there, breathing shallow breaths that warmed the nylon between us. Seconds ticked by, stretching like minutes. I lay frozen, counting my heartbeats, the pounding louder than the wind. Then, light fingers, almost curious, began playing with the tent's bottom edge, tugging gently as if testing the fabric. Plastic teeth clinked as the zipper pulled up a notch. My lungs finally burst out. "Hey, who's there?" The shout cracked in my throat but broke the silence like a gunshot. For a moment, everything froze. Then Dad's voice cut through the dark. "Caleb, you okay?" The zipper rasped, boots thudded across the clearing, and a flashlight beam sliced through the trees. The weight on the tent was gone. No rustling, no scrambling, just disappeared. I fumbled to unzip my tent, tumbled out into the flashlight's glow, nearly bumping into Dad's outstretched arm. Behind him, Emily and Jake blinked groggily in their tent doorways while their border collie watched us with lazy eyes, tail thumping slowly. We searched under logs, behind boulders, up every faint animal path, but found nothing but tree trunks and our own overlapping footprints. No claw marks, no boot prints, not even the branch I'd heard dragging. After an hour, Dad convinced me nothing else would happen that night. I agreed, but my body wouldn't go back into the tent. I rolled out my sleeping bag in the truck bed, locked the canopy, and stared out the window until the eastern ridge glowed pale beyond the glass. The forest held its secrets, and I tried to pretend I hadn't just felt it breathe against my skin. I didn't really sleep. I hovered half awake in the truck bed, eyes fixed on the treetops that fenced the sky. Now and then the wind nudged a branch and my heart jumped, sure I'd see that sudden white flash again, sure a stranger's face would be pressed against the glass. Dawn finally faded the stars, painting the ridge lines soft gray. Dad knocked on the canopy, coffee steaming in one hand, flashlight in the other. We walked the site before breakfast, toes cold inside our boots. The ring of disturbed soil I'd imagined around the tents was real. A faint groove curving through pine needles and gravel, wide enough for a walking stick. But we never found the branch that made it. Beside my flattened tent wall were two perfect depressions, like someone had knelt there, one knee then the other, leaving prints too shallow to hold their shape. Emily tried to laugh it off, saying coyotes sometimes sniff tents, but she kept glancing toward the dark tree line, as if expecting shutters to close behind the woods. Jake poured bourbon into his mug instead of cream and whistled for the dog. She ignored him and pressed close to Emily's leg. I packed my bag back into the truck, telling everyone I preferred the firm truck bed, but Dad only nodded and double-checked the tailgate lock. The day passed with forced normalcy. We fished below the outlet dam, caught 2 brook trout, and tried to pretend everything was simple again. But even the lake felt strange, too still like glass. On the hike back, I spotted a single boot print in a patch of damp soil along the stream. Smaller than mine, heel split by a smooth crack like older Vibram soles wear. No one else saw it, and I didn't say a word. That night, the fire burned longer, flames pushing the dark back to camp's edge. Still, I heard the forest thinking. Every now and then, Emily's dog lifted her head, ears twitching, then nothing. No bark, no growl, just a puzzled whine, like she smelled something her brain couldn't understand. We waited until midnight and put out the fire together. Dad offered the truck bed again. I accepted. He closed the canopy from outside, shook it firmly, and said, "Wake me if anything changes." His voice told me he didn't expect to sleep either. Hours crawled by. Spruce needles clicked against the aluminum shell, a harmless but constant reminder that only thin walls separated me from everything outside. Once, maybe twice, in the early morning, the dog yipped twice, sharp and confused. I heard Dad's boots crunch toward the tree line and back. He didn't wake me. When morning came, bright and clear, we decided to leave a day early. Nobody argued. While Jake packed his tent, I coiled my guidelines. I'd shaken most of the dust off when something white flipped near the roots of a fir tree. A Polaroid, edges wavering like wet bark. I picked it up carefully, holding only a corner. The picture was dark but clear. Our 3 tents framed by trees, moonlight catching the silvery rainfly on mine. The photo was taken from inside the woods, about 30 or 40 yards away, zoomed in close. A smudge of red numbers stamped the bottom. 1:43 a.m. My breath caught. That was when I'd been frozen, listening to the zipper's soft pull. I turned the photo over. Ink had bled in the damp, but the shapes were clear enough. A round, smiley face with wide eyes, and beneath it, 3 neat words freshly written. "I see you." For a moment, all I could hear was my pounding heart. Dad's voice finally broke through, asking if I found the stake. I slipped the Polaroid into a zippered pocket and walked over. Jake and Emily crowded close. The dog tucked her tail. We threw camp into the truck bed without any of yesterday's neat folding. On the drive down the mountain switchbacks, Emily kept checking the side mirror. Jake clicked off the safety on the pistol Dad kept between the seats. No one spoke until we reached the ranger station. The ranger studied the photo, logged our coordinates, and promised a patrol would check the area. "Probably a prank," she said. But her knuckles went white as she handed the picture back in a plastic evidence sleeve. Home was 10 hours away on the highway. I stared out the window and tried not to blink, afraid the next flash I'd see wouldn't be lightning or sunlight on chrome, but the same cold burst of white that turned my tent into a photo taken from the dark. I sold that tent 2 days later. The buyer asked why I was selling such a good model so cheap. I told him backcountry nights just weren't magic anymore. He laughed and said the woods were the only place he ever felt safe. I hope he never camps near Silver Creek. I never thought our anniversary trip would lead us to something so terrifying. My husband, Ethan, and I had always been drawn to forgotten spots. Abandoned graveyards, ghost towns, and old trails barely used anymore. That's why we chose Bryson City, North Carolina, for our first wedding anniversary trip. The plan was to explore the quieter side of the Great Smoky Mountains, away from the busy tourist trails and crowded souvenir shops. For a whole week, we had been comfortably settled in our camper by the Taucasigee River, going out each day on little adventures and coming back tired but happy. On our last full day, we decided to visit a place we had found on the internet called Baxter Cemetery. It wasn't on any official maps, and the few scattered mentions online described it as hidden near Mill Creek, about 2 miles from the park's main entrance. I had jotted down vague directions from half-forgotten forums into my notebook, excited by the mystery of it all. Ethan laughed at my habit of writing everything down, but he understood it was part of the excitement, the thrill of exploring forgotten places together. We pulled off at an unmarked turnout along Blue Ridge Parkway. The woods rose thick and dark around us, heavy with towering old trees. Felt untouched, like it had been left alone for years. I led the way carefully, scanning the ground for snakes, holes, or anything that might trip us up. Ethan walked behind me, quieter than usual. The forest felt oddly silent as we left the road behind. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, just the faint crunch of our footsteps on dry leaves. After about 15 minutes, the trail narrowed and the trees closed in tighter, branches brushing softly against our arms as we walked by. The air grew warm and close, almost suffocating. I found myself glancing back at Ethan more than once, catching his eyes as he scanned the trees. Something about the place felt different, heavier. He must have felt it too, but neither of us said a word. We'd gone a bit further when Ethan suddenly stopped behind me. I turned to ask what was wrong, but he whispered, "Look at that statue." My eyes instinctively followed his finger, half expecting to see an old weathered angel, like those you often find in abandoned cemeteries. But instead, what stood between the distant trees sent a cold shiver down my spine. A strange figure, about 15 feet tall, partly hidden by thick branches and leaves. At first, I thought it was a statue or some odd piece of local art, but the longer I looked, the less it seemed like art. Its limbs were thin and unnaturally long, covered in something that looked like tight leathery skin stretched over a frame of bones or wood. Its shape was vaguely like a deer, but horribly distorted. The face made my skin crawl, a twisted skull blending features of a deer and camel, missing a proper snout. The mouth hung slightly open, and its eyes were large, glassy, and strangely reflective, catching the little sunlight filtering through the canopy. It didn't move, but it looked so real, like it might step forward at any moment. "What the hell is that?" Ethan whispered, barely audible, his voice tense with fear. "I don't know," I breathed, unable to look away. Then, ever so slightly, the figure moved its right ear, grotesquely long, rotating slowly in a full circle, smooth and unnatural, like it was listening in every direction. A faint clicking sound floated through the quiet, an almost mechanical noise. My stomach knotted with fear. Ethan took a shaky breath beside me. "It blinked, Emma," he said softly, his voice breaking with disbelief and dread. The damn thing blinked. My heart pounded faster and nausea hit me hard. I hadn't seen the blink myself, but I didn't doubt Ethan. Nothing about this felt right. Without speaking, we both took slow, careful steps backward, never turning our backs completely. The forest remained unnervingly still as we retreated, every crunch underfoot echoing in the heavy silence. I felt watched. No, I knew something was watching us, eyes boring into the back of my neck, cold and inhuman, following our every move. When we finally reached the paved road again, sounds rushed back. The distant hum of cars, birds singing, wind rustling leaves overhead. It was as if we had stepped out of a bubble, leaving something ancient and wrong behind. Back at our camper, Ethan didn't speak for almost an hour, staring blankly at the floor. I was shaken, unable to process what we had seen. My hands trembled as I searched online for any explanation, but there was nothing. No legends, no reports, no obscure artist claiming responsibility. It was like neither the place nor the creature existed at all. That night, lying awake in the camper, I stared into the dark, terrified to sleep. Ethan tossed and turned beside me, murmuring quietly, clearly troubled by nightmares. When sleep finally came, I found myself back on that same narrow trail. It was darker and colder, the path harder to follow. Just behind me, out of sight, I heard the faint clicking sound again, the slow rotation of something listening in the shadows, waiting, watching. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the camper's thin curtains, casting everything in a strange, grayish light. Neither Ethan nor I had slept much after yesterday's encounter. The little rest we managed was broken by unsettling dreams and a constant feeling of being watched. We sat quietly at the small kitchenette table, sipping lukewarm coffee, neither ready to talk about what happened. Eventually, Ethan broke the silence. "We can't be the only ones who've seen it," he said quietly, staring into his cup. "Someone local has to know something." I nodded, remembering the small Native American bookstore we'd visited earlier that week, run by an elderly Cherokee woman named Mary. She had been friendly and knowledgeable about the region, encouraging us to visit lesser-known spots. I hoped she might have answers, or at least a clue. The drive into town felt longer than before. Every turn on the winding road made me jumpy, the trees pressing close, casting flickering shadows that danced across the windshield, reminding me too much of that twisted figure in the woods. The little bell above the shop door jingled softly as we stepped inside. The air was thick with the comforting scent of old books and incense. Mary greeted us warmly, but her smile faded quickly when she saw our faces. "What happened?" she asked gently, concern deepening the lines on her face. As calmly as we could, Ethan and I described everything. The trail, the silence, the disturbing figure with its impossible shape and unnatural movements. Mary's expression shifted from curiosity to something more cautious. Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. She fell silent for a moment after we finished, studying us carefully. Then, without a word, she moved to the front door, flipping the sign from open to closed and locking it behind her. "Come with me," she said quietly but firmly. She led us into a back room filled with fragile old books, artifacts, and handmade crafts. Sitting us down at a worn wooden table, she took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You've stumbled onto something most people here don't talk about," she began slowly. "There are old things in these mountains, things that existed long before people arrived. Spirits, watchers, beings whose names were never meant to be spoken aloud." A chill ran down my neck. Ethan shifted nervously in his seat. "What you saw is known, but rarely spoken of," Mary continued. "My grandmother warned me about them when I was a child. She called them guardians or watchers, ancient spirits tied to the land. They show themselves only when they choose." "What does it want?" Ethan asked softly, voice strained. Mary shook her head, eyes sad but firm. "It could be a warning, could be a test, or it could be hunting." The last word hung heavy in the air. I swallowed hard, throat dry. "What do we do now?" Her gaze locked on mine, intense. "Leave. Forget you saw it. And whatever you do, don't go back. These beings, they're like hooks. The more attention you give them, the deeper they dig in." Even as she spoke, something inside me resisted. A quiet voice whispered that I had to return, needed proof, something solid to hold on to. Beside me, Ethan's restless fingers tapped anxiously on the table. I wondered if he felt the same pull. We thanked Mary softly, promising to consider her words carefully. As we left, she caught my arm gently, looking straight into my eyes. "Emma, please be careful. Sometimes the more you search, the harder it is to escape." Back at the camper, the sun was setting, painting the trees in deep orange and purple. Ethan stared blankly ahead, still unsettled by Mary's warning. The uneasy feeling hadn't faded, it had only grown. As darkness settled, the heavy silence around us thickened. Ethan paced nervously, checking and rechecking the door locks. I watched the shadows moving slowly across the trees from the camper window. Something was wrong. The silence wasn't peaceful. I drove out to Pine Ridge Forest near the beginning of October, hoping to catch one last calm weekend before the cold weather settled in. The spot I picked wasn't marked on any map, just a small clearing I had found by chance the previous fall. It was a cozy little space, surrounded by tall trees whose leaves were just starting to turn deep orange and rusty brown. I remember thinking how beautiful everything looked bathed in the soft autumn sunlight. It gave me a sense of calm that only being outside can bring. That first afternoon went smoothly. I set up my tent, gathered some dry wood for a fire, and listened to distant bird calls I couldn't quite recognize. The air was cool but not chilly, and my dinner cooked over the fire tasted incredible. As evening came, nothing seemed unusual. The normal forest sounds at night slowly carried me off to a deep, dreamless sleep. But the next morning, something felt strange. At first, I couldn't say exactly what was wrong. I woke up to sunlight filtering through the branches, and for a moment, everything seemed fine. Then I noticed how jumpy I felt. My eyes kept darting from the coffee pot I was trying to use back toward the tree line, like I was half expecting someone to be watching me. There was no real reason to feel scared, but every step I took felt heavier than usual. After breakfast, I found myself wandering deeper into the woods, even though I hadn't planned a long hike. It was like the trees were pulling me in somehow. That's the best way I can describe it. I didn't really decide to go. My feet just moved on their own. The farther I walked, the more I realized this part of the forest was unfamiliar. The way the tree trunks and bushes were arranged wasn't something I'd seen before. Then I spotted something that unsettled me more than any animal noise could. There on the ground lay a perfectly smooth, rectangular slab. It shone in the weak sunlight, completely free of scratches or moss, even though the ground was covered with leaves. When you spend time camping, you know how fast nature covers anything left out, so how was this thing so clean? My gut told me to turn back, but curiosity pushed me forward. I stepped cautiously, trying not to crack any twigs. The slab looked like a fallen tombstone, except it had no writing or markings. And it didn't belong here. This wasn't a path anyone used. No one was around for miles, at least no one I'd seen. Standing there, a heavy feeling pressed down on my mind. It was like I'd stepped into a part of the forest that didn't want me there. Even though my tent was just about 40 feet behind me, I felt lost, like my sense of direction had disappeared in seconds. I forced myself to look back, and there was my bright green tent, still visible. So I wasn't truly lost, but every sense told me something was wrong. Then suddenly, a blast of cold air hit me, so sharp I almost gasped. The trees didn't move, and not a leaf stirred. Before I could think it through, a loud crack exploded nearby. It was a single, booming sound that echoed in every direction. My ears rang, and when the noise died down, I looked up to see the sun was sinking low. What had felt like mid-afternoon was now evening. Hours had passed without me noticing. Even more confusing, the slab was gone. In its place was just a patch of bare earth covered with leaves. That snapped me out of the trance I'd been in. Every step back to camp felt like something invisible was closing in, though I couldn't see anything. When I reached my tent, I fumbled for my flashlight, even though it was still light enough outside. Logically, I knew it was too risky to try leaving the forest then. Darkness was coming fast, and I was too shaken to find my way through the unfamiliar woods. So I told myself to wait until morning, no matter how scary the night would be, and scary was the right word. I hurried into my tent, repeating over and over that I just had to survive the night. My nerves were stretched thin. Outside, the forest was eerily quiet. No rustling leaves, no distant bird calls, nothing. It was as if the woods had fallen completely silent, like I had crossed into a place I wasn't meant to enter. Inside the tent, I kept turning my flashlight on and off, making sure it still worked. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck in total darkness if the batteries died. Each flicker of light threw strange shadows onto the fabric around me. Normally, that soft glow would be comforting, but now it felt like I was advertising my spot to something watching outside. Time crawled by. My watch said it was just after sunset, but it might as well have been midnight. Eventually, I tried lying down, hoping to rest my eyes, but that hope vanished quickly when I heard a low, rumbling noise outside the thin tent walls. At first, I thought it was thunder in the distance. Then I realized it sounded more like a deep, slow breathing, almost like snoring. I held my breath, trying to tell if I was imagining it. The sound came again, slow, heavy, and with a soft rasp. It seemed to move around my campsite, sometimes near, sometimes farther away. This unsettled me more than anything. I'd been camping enough to know how animals sound when they settle down. They shuffle, rustle leaves, snap twigs, or snort, but this was different. No crunching, no movement, just that steady, quiet rumble circling around. I tried to tell myself it might be a bear getting ready to sleep, but the total lack of any other sound made me feel sick. How could it float around my camp like that? One moment it was to my left, the next behind me, though behind meant just beyond the thin tent fabric. I was too scared to unzip the door and look. I gripped my flashlight tightly, but it felt useless. What was I going to do? Shine a light in a huge animal's face and hope it ran off? Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. I lay frozen, barely breathing, listening to the rasping sound moving around me. Sometimes it stopped completely, and silence fell. Those pauses were worse than the noise because I never knew if it was gone or just waiting. Sleep was impossible. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but every time they closed, the noise started again, jerking me awake. I remember silently begging for dawn, praying the light would come soon. It felt like the longest wait of my life. Too scared to move, too awake to rest. Then, just before sunrise, the snoring noise faded away suddenly. The quiet that followed was even more terrifying. Clutching my flashlight, I listened carefully for any sign of movement. A snap, a crack, anything. But there was nothing. It was like the forest was pretending nothing strange had happened. When the first rays of morning light finally shone through, I wasted no time packing up. My hands shook as I hurried, my ears alert to every small sound. The forest stayed strangely silent. It took me half the time to break down camp and sling my gear on my back. The walk out was tense. Each step on the trail felt like I was trespassing in a place that didn't want visitors. The trees that had seemed so pretty before now loomed above me like silent watchers. I kept glancing over my shoulder, sure something was about to jump out and block my way, but nothing appeared, at least nothing I could see. By the time I reached a rough dirt road that led back to my car, my shoulders were tight and my mind scrambled with questions. I looked back once more, half expecting to see that shiny slab again, or at least some shadow moving among the trees. But all I saw were the same autumn trees standing still and quiet. I didn't feel safe until I was inside my car, engine running, speeding away. Whatever happened in those woods made no sense. One moment time vanished like I'd been pulled out of reality, and the next I was stuck in a tense, watchful state, listening to something that shouldn't exist. I wish I could say I forgot about it after leaving, but that memory stuck with me. Those lost hours, the silent watchers between the trunks, the strange breathing in the dark, they stayed with me long after I got home. I'd wake up at night, sure I heard that low rumble coming from a corner of the room. My rational mind tells me it was just a nightmare or my senses playing tricks. But deep down I know I found something in those woods I wasn't meant to find. And no matter how far I go, it refuses to let me be, haunting me even hundreds of miles away. I desperately needed to escape. The city had been grinding me down little by little, day after endless day. Emails, deadlines, traffic that never moved. It all mixed into a poisonous brew that I could feel eating away at me from the inside. A few nights alone in the forest, away from everyone and everything, seemed like the perfect way to cleanse my mind. I chose a spot near Hopi Land, deep in northern New Mexico. The trailhead was barely noticeable, a rusty metal sign half hidden in overgrown grass, marking a path so faint it could have been mistaken for a deer run. That was just fine with me. If no one else used it, I'd have real quiet, real peace. I parked my old Jeep off to the side and grabbed my pack from the back seat. It was still, just the soft rustle of pine needles in the cool morning breeze. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt lighter. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal, not surprised. and even the GPS app flickered uncertainly, jumping between coordinates. I shook my head, turned it off, and slid it into my jacket pocket. I wouldn't be needing it anyway. The walk started out easy. Tall ponderosa pines and thick green juniper branches made a nice shade against the rising sun. The air was sharp and fresh, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp soil. For the first half hour, my tightness slowly unwound with every step. My mind cleared of all the city noise I'd carried in. But as I went deeper, something subtle changed in the air. The birds stopped singing. The bugs vanished. Even the wind faded away like someone had turned the volume down. Silence filled the forest so thickly it pressed on my ears until my own breathing sounded strange and loud. I pushed on, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. After all, solitude was exactly why I'd come. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That crawling, prickling sensation along the back of my neck and under my collarbone. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal, curious but cautious, hiding somewhere nearby. But animals don't make silence like this, a complete absence of life. The further I walked, the weirder it got. Twigs were scattered on the sides of the path, arranged into crude triangles, shapes so deliberate they made my skin crawl. Further on, several big tree trunks were shredded, bark torn away in long, parallel gouges, too high up for any animal I knew. I ran my fingers over the rough wounds in the wood, and a chill ran down my spine. By mid-afternoon, I reached where my map said my campsite should be. But the clearing wasn't a clearing at all. It was thick wild brush, a snarled mess of roots and branches blocking the way. I checked my map again, confused. The coordinates matched perfectly, but nothing looked right. I sighed and decided to retrace my steps, thinking I must have made a simple error. But when I turned around, the path behind me had changed. The pine trees I just walked past had closed in, blocking the way, twisting the trail into something unfamiliar. My heart raced. I could swear I had passed between two big trees, but now there were three, clustered too close together for me to have slipped through. "You're just tired," I whispered to myself, voice barely audible in the heavy silence. "You're imagining things." Still, I made camp. I cleared a space among the roots and fallen pine needles. Darkness crept in fast, faster than I expected. The forest grew quieter, the heavy silence thickening until it felt like a living thing pressing on me. I built a small fire. The flames crackled, casting flickering shadows on the tree trunks around me. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I crawled into my tent and zipped it closed. Sleep came in fits, broken by dreams full of long, strange shadows creeping across my tent walls. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke suddenly. My eyes snapped open, ears straining in the dark. Footsteps circled my tent, slow, deliberate, bare on dry pine needles. My heart pounded, adrenaline sharpening every sense. I lay still, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps stopped right outside the thin nylon of the tent. Then I heard breathing slow, steady. A soft exhale brushed the fabric, as if something on the other side was sniffing me, trying to catch my scent. Fear curled tight in my stomach, sharp and heavy. Summoning every bit of courage, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. I flashed my light into the darkness in one sudden burst of defiance. The beam swept over empty ground. The breathing stopped instantly. My heart pounded. I aimed the flashlight down and saw fresh footprints. Long toes, narrow arches, not quite human, but not animal either. I spun the light across the clearing, scanning between trees, but found nothing but shadows dancing on bark. Hands shaking, I zipped the tent shut. Sleep never came. I stayed curled up until dawn, faint and cold, promising safety it couldn't deliver. When morning arrived, the silence stayed thick and suffocating. Whatever had been outside hadn't left. It lingered in the trees, watching, waiting. I knew with a sinking certainty that the woods wouldn't let me go easily. The sun was pale behind the trees, offering little warmth and less comfort. I crawled out stiff and tense, every muscle tight from the night's terror. My campsite was just as I left it, but the footprints, twisted, long impressions of bare feet, circled around relentlessly, a chilling sign of the unseen watcher. I packed quickly, eyes scanning the forest. Logic told me it must have moved on, lost interest, but instinct whispered darker truths. It was still here, waiting and watching. With no clear path and nowhere else to turn, I headed downhill, hoping the small creek I saw the day before would lead to safety. Maybe a road, maybe an open clearing, anything but this suffocating maze of trees. But the land mocked me. The creek twisted in impossible loops, doubling back on itself until I was standing breathless exactly where I'd started hours ago. I stopped, standing frozen, panic rising. The silence was deafening. No wind, no rustle, no birdsong. My own breath sounded sharp and painful in my ears. Every instinct screamed that this silence wasn't natural. It was a predator's quiet. Then I heard it. A low clicking, rhythmic and sharp, echoing faintly behind me. My pulse raced. I turned slowly, eyes straining into the gloom. The forest looked empty, motionless. But the clicking kept going, dry and brittle like bones tapping. "Hello!" My voice cracked, hollow and unsure, swallowed by the thick silence. The clicking stopped. Seconds passed, stretching painfully. As I turned away, a faint whisper floated through the trees. "Hello!" My heart leapt. The voice sounded exactly like mine. The same tone, the same hesitation, the same pitch. I spun, eyes darting between tree trunks. Nothing but shadows. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away slowly. This couldn't be happening. Was I losing my mind? Another whisper came, closer now, echoing my panic in my own voice. "What the hell?" I bolted. Panic surged through me, driving me blindly through the undergrowth. Branches tore at my skin. Hidden rocks threatened to twist my ankles. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision blurred. I stumbled over a fallen log, collapsing to my knees, gasping. The trees seemed to close in, looming like silent judges. Blood dripped down my face from a cut above my eye. Sweat and blood stinging, I scanned the shadows. My heart stopped when I saw it. It stood still, tall and thin and horribly twisted. Its body was human-shaped, but long limbs covered in patchy coarse fur and pale sick skin. Its face was worse. A warped, pale imitation of human features, stretched like a mask that didn't fit. Its eyes gleamed faintly, reflecting the dim light like an animal's. Stood upright, completely motionless. I froze, throat tight, unable to scream. The creature tilted its head slowly, studying me. Its mouth opened, showing too many sharp teeth, packed into a jaw that shouldn't hold them all. Slowly, deliberately, it took a step toward me. I stumbled back, scrambling away, eyes fixed on its unnatural gait. It moved with jerks and twitches, almost like a bad imitation of human movement. I broke eye contact for just a moment. When I looked again, it was closer, far closer than it should have been. Its limbs bent at strange angles as it twisted around a tree, peeking at me from behind the trunk. Still silent, still watching. "Stay back," I shouted, voice shaking. It just stared, eyes empty of any understanding or mercy. Desperation made me stand. I grabbed a rock and hurled it at the creature. It hit the tree with a loud crack, splinters flying. The creature didn't flinch. It simply moved, vanishing behind the trunk, then reappearing even closer. Too close. I usually finish my work shift after everyone else in the house is asleep, so walking my dog Milo under the faint glow of the suburban streetlights had become my usual routine. That evening, the road shimmered with puddles left over from a recent shower, turning the yard lights into broken shards of silver. It was the kind of quiet neighborhood you'd expect. Rows of tidy houses in a peaceful little town in Georgia, where nothing unusual should happen. Yet the reflections on the wet pavement gave everything a strange, blurry look. I kept squinting, unsure if my eyes were just worn out or if the shiny spots really made it harder to see anything beyond their glow. The neighborhood was silent. No other walkers were around. No cars passed by, just Milo and me. Milo was calm and easygoing, barely interested in squirrels, much less strangers. Usually, That put me at ease, but tonight my mind wandered to darker thoughts, wondering if we were really as safe as I wanted to believe. We kept moving down the narrow street without sidewalks, staying close to the edge. Whenever I thought I heard a car coming from far away, I listened hard. But tonight, there wasn't a single engine sound. My thoughts drifted as I looked up at the stars, then down again, scanning the dark lawns for any signs of life. That's when I noticed something. A shadowy figure far ahead, standing still. It could have been anything, maybe just a trick of the light, but I knew I wasn't imagining it when it slowly seemed to get closer. My heart started pounding, but I told myself it was probably just a neighbor, nothing to worry about. I couldn't turn around anyway, or I'd have this person behind me for the rest of the walk. So I kept going, hugging the curb while Milo sniffed every mailbox post we passed. The figure looked tall, and as I got closer, I saw they wore glasses. The yard lights caught the lenses, flashing faint glimmers every time they moved their head. That reflection felt weirdly mesmerizing, like two small mirrors staring right at me. I tried not to look directly. The next streetlight was quite far ahead, leaving a big patch of dark space between us. In those few seconds of shadow, I realized how quiet the figure was. No phone, no shuffle of feet on gravel, nothing. I prepared myself, half expecting them to say hello or nod, but nothing happened. Milo suddenly perked up, which was strange because he usually ignored strangers. His leash tightened in my hand. We were almost side by side when the person stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Without a word, the figure began moving backward, step by step, matching my pace like we were in some silent, strange dance. Milo, usually so calm, erupted in loud barks, pulling so hard I almost lost my balance. My mind jumped from embarrassment over my noisy dog to sharp fear pulsing through me. The stranger had no dog, no friendly gesture, just a steady backward movement and those reflective glasses fixed on me. I couldn't decide what was more unsettling, Milo's fierce reaction, or the way the person kept retreating without breaking eye contact behind those lenses. At that moment, the streetlights seemed dimmer, and the houses looked unnervingly still. My hands shook on Milo's leash, unsure whether to yell or just keep walking. All I knew was that I wanted to get away fast. I wasn't about to stand there locked in that creepy standoff with someone gliding backward like a ghost. My eyes landed on a brighter intersection a short way ahead, lit by porch lights and faint passing car headlights. Without thinking twice, I pulled on Milo's leash and practically rushed toward the light. He barked, reluctant to leave that strange figure behind, but after a few strong tugs, he followed me stumbling onto the well-lit street. The sudden change from shadow to light made my eyes hurt. I looked back, searching for any sign of the stranger, but the stretch of houses behind us looked empty. Either they had vanished into the darkness or my nerves were playing tricks on me. Milo whimpered, his ears up, still uneasy. My grip was sweaty, and I kept expecting to see a shadow hiding behind a mailbox or sneaking around a corner. All I wanted now was the safe, familiar feeling of home. Every time a twig snapped or a bird called, I nearly jumped. It was like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. No one to call out to, no friendly face at a window. Just a few more blocks and I could slam my door shut against whatever nightmare I'd just faced. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the glint of glasses again. Instead, all I saw were wet driveways and parked cars silhouetted in the dim light. I slowed down when a car finally appeared, its headlights sweeping across me and casting long shadows on the street. For a second, I panicked, thinking it might be the same person, but it was just some random sedan, the driver unaware of my fear. When the car passed, silence came back, heavier than before. My house felt miles away, but finally, I saw my porch light. Usually, that soft glow would be comforting, but tonight it felt like a warning beacon. Milo tugged ahead, eager to get inside, still tense, and honestly, so was I. By the time I reached the door, my hands trembled so much I fumbled with my keys several times before finally getting one in the lock. When the door clicked open, I almost ran inside, dragging Milo with me. I switched on every lamp I could reach, then quickly turned most off when I realized how exposed the bright windows made me feel. Darkness seemed safer somehow. I settled for a single table lamp in the living room, just enough to see. Milo paced, whining, still unsettled. I kept expecting a knock or someone peering through the window. My heart jumped every time I imagined it. Eventually, I forced myself to check every lock, back door, even the tiny windows near the laundry room. All secure. But that didn't calm me. My mind raced with questions. Who was that person? Why did they walk backward, staring so intently? Was it some sick joke or something more dangerous? I spent the next hour on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, debating whether to call someone, anyone, and explain what happened. But how do you explain a stranger who freaked you out just by walking backward? It sounded crazy. Still, the dread was real. I couldn't shake the image of those mirrored glasses catching the streetlights or Milo's fierce barking, like he was warning me of something serious. Sleep was impossible. Even when I finally turned off the lights and lay down, I imagined footsteps crunching gravel outside the window. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake, hearing silence. Milo lay curled at my feet, sometimes lifting his head like he was listening for an intruder too. When morning came, the sunlight spilled through the blinds, coloring everything in warm, normal hues. The terror from the night before felt far away, almost like a bad dream. But the leash by the front door still had fresh teeth marks from when Milo had yanked it in his panic. That was proof enough that night wasn't just in my head. I never saw the figure again. But every evening since, when I take Milo out, I find myself scanning every street corner, looking for a tall shape, maybe a flash of glasses. And if I catch any shadow in the distance, my chest tightens right away. That's the thing about fear. It sticks with you long after your front door is locked, like it's waiting just beyond the places where the light fades. I remember piling into the rusty old car with 3 of my friends, excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. We didn't have a clear plan, we rarely do, and that made everything feel twice as risky. The road leading to the woods was a patchwork of cracked pavement and weeds pushing through the brakes. My friend Mike kept making jokes about lost hikers and strange sightings to lighten the mood. Nobody really laughed, but we all pretended it was just for fun. By the time we found a spot where we could hide the car without risking a tow, the sun was low, casting the fields around us in a soft golden light. Tall corn grew on both sides of the narrow path, forming almost a tunnel that seemed to invite us in. We hoisted our backpacks and stepped right into the stalks, my legs brushing the rough leaves as my eyes scanned the rows, half expecting someone to jump out. Of course, no one did, just the occasional breeze bending the corn in rhythm. Eventually, the fields opened into a cluster of trees, and we started following a faint trail weaving through bushes and fallen branches. My boots kept catching on twisted roots, but I pushed ahead. Since I'd been the one to suggest this trip, I didn't want anyone thinking I was scared. Behind me, Emma was breathing hard and swatting at bugs buzzing around her ears. Every time she flinched, I gripped my backpack straps tighter, trying to convince myself it was just nerves. After about an hour, we reached what counted as a clearing. Just a spot with fewer shrubs, feeling quiet and isolated, perfect if you wanted to really get away from it all. We dropped our gear. Mike wasted no time struggling with the tent poles, muttering whenever a stake refused to go into the ground. Meanwhile, I wandered around the edge, kicking aside dead leaves and looking out where the trees grew thicker. Even in daylight, the woods swallowed up sound. No birds, no rustling branches, just a heavy stillness, like the forest was waiting to tell a secret if you listened close enough. Once the tent was up and the fire pit made, we sat watching the day fade. The warm golden light disappeared quickly, and the air cooled. I tried to focus on the small fire's crackle, but there was a feeling that something out there had noticed us. Mike and Emma joked about old campfire legends, while our friend Lisa kept staring into the tree line, lost in thought. I found myself wishing the night would hurry past or show us whatever was hiding in the dark. When night fully settled, the air became so still every small sound felt close yet impossible to place. There'd be a crunch of leaves a few yards away, Then silence. A twig snapped and all of us turned at once, straining to see anything beyond the weak circle of firelight. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that forests have animals and it's normal to hear them moving about. But the sounds felt deliberate, stalking us in wide circles. Hours later, my nerves were shredded. I saw a flicker behind Mike, but when I shone my flashlight there, nothing was there. That was the breaking point for all of us. Lisa muttered something about heading back, and no one argued. We put out the fire as fast as possible, grabbed our packs, and left half our things behind, planning to return later with more daylight and maybe more courage. As we rushed away, the path disappeared into thick rows of corn. We realized we'd taken a wrong turn. The tall stalks scraped our arms and faces, turning us in circles until we couldn't tell which way was which. The ground beneath our boots was soft and damp, covered in fallen husks. We called out to each other more to keep track than to scare anything off. Still, something kept pace with us, never closer than a few steps, like it was pushing us toward the edge. My chest tightened by the time we stumbled onto a rough gravel road. The corn rustled once more, then all was quiet, almost politely letting us escape. None of us spoke as we marched to the cars. It was strange how the threat vanished so suddenly. We crammed into the car and Mike started the engine with shaky hands. The headlights briefly lit the trail's entrance, showing nothing but rows of stalks standing still as if nothing had happened. Nobody said a word on the drive home. I kept replaying every flicker of light and every noise, trying to convince myself it was all wildlife and nothing was wrong. But deep down, I was sure we'd attracted unwanted attention. The worst part was knowing we'd have to go back for our gear in the morning. Sunlight changes everything, or so I thought. Early the next day, Mike banged on my door at sunrise, determined to retrieve the tents and gear we'd left behind. Neither of us could pretend the night before hadn't shaken us, but we wanted to act tough. We rallied the others and climbed back into the car, thinking daylight would chase away whatever was out there. When we arrived, the dew sparkled on tall grass and birds sang, like they didn't know how tense things had been hours earlier. We took the same rough path into the woods, stepping over broken twigs and worn patches of dirt we recognized from our frantic escape. The place felt smaller somehow, tamer. My shoulders relaxed a little, hoping our imaginations had gotten the better of us. Mike started joking again, tapping a tree and saying he could have sworn it moved last night. We all laughed, though Emma still looked uneasy. At least it wasn't pitch black anymore. We teased each other about bravery, pretending daylight had driven off the shadows. Then, suddenly, someone shouted, "Marco!" and laughter broke out among us. It was a silly way to shake off nerves. We kept walking, waiting for something out of place. Then, faint and distant, a voice cut through the quiet. "Polo!" We froze. It didn't sound close, but there was an edge to it, calm but just out of normal hearing range. Nobody spoke. Then Mike nervously called Marco again. The voice answered once more, "Polo." Something about it felt off in the daylight, like we'd gone from watchers to the watched. Still, we followed the voice deeper into the woods than before. Above us, the tree canopy thickened, letting the sun filter through in thin ribbons. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. Even the birds stopped singing, as if they were keeping their distance. We finally reached an old rusted barbed wire fence, twisted and nearly hidden by vines. Beyond it lay the foundation of a building, just weathered stones and broken boards. It looked like whoever built it had disappeared long ago, leaving only the skeleton behind. Back home, we'd seen abandoned barns and houses, but this one had a strange, unpleasant feeling. The ground was littered with broken glass and rotting wood. The fence posts bore deep scratches, like something with claws had tried to climb them. The voice went silent. We paused, scanning for a figure hiding behind the walls. Nothing moved. The ruined foundation stared back, daring us to get closer. My nerves prickled as we approached the open doorway leading inside. Chunks of wood and stone cast eerie shapes and shadows, even in daylight. Emma called out Marco one last time. Silence. We stepped closer, unsettled by what looked like dried dark streaks on some fallen boards. Part of me wanted to think it was just dirt or moss, but it shimmered in a way that twisted my stomach. The air smelled stale, maybe mixed with mildew or something worse. We spread out, trying to find where the voice had come from. No footprints or fresh signs of anyone living or hiding here. Yet all of us felt trapped, as if eyes were tracking every move. Mike kicked a broken beam and muttered how messed up it was. Lisa stayed close behind, like she sensed something moving between the trees. All our earlier bravado vanished. We decided we'd had enough exploring for the day. The tents were nowhere in sight. Either we'd taken the wrong turn or they were deeper in the woods than we thought. After seeing the ruin, none of us wanted to stay longer. As we headed back, the silence felt heavier than before. Every snapped twig behind us made me jump. We tried to stay calm, but it felt like walking on glass, waiting for something to jump out at any moment. My heart pounded in my ears. I was grateful we stayed together. It took all my will not to run when we finally cleared the fence and saw the forest thinning. Relief washed over me. The sun felt warmer, and I could finally breathe again. But when I glanced back, I caught a blur. Maybe a person, maybe just moving leaves. Hard to tell. Either way, it made me quicken my pace. We reached the trailhead with a collective sigh, promising never to come back. We started this trip to prove we could handle whatever the forest threw at us. But something else was there, something we couldn't understand. Whatever called out with that polo either lost interest or moved on. Our tent was probably still out there, but I felt safer leaving it behind. Sometimes it's better to just walk away, especially when you don't know what or who you're dealing with. We drove off, silent until we reached the main road. Our uneasy look said everything. Daylight might have made the woods seem friendlier at first, but it only peeled back one layer, revealing a deeper, more unsettling truth. There's something about that place that follows its own rules, and we were lucky to leave when we did. I had been slouched in my creaky office chair, watching the clock, waiting for the midday sun to lose some of its strength. Suddenly, the radio on my desk burst to life. One of our volunteers' voices shook as they called in for urgent help. They'd seen smoke rising near the far edge of our small Sandridge preserve. Usually, smoke like that meant another junked car set on fire, a thing we dealt with often enough that it didn't bother me anymore. But the nervous tone in the volunteer's voice put me on edge. Something about this felt wrong. Without waiting for the usual checklists or signing out, I grabbed my keys and signaled Manny, my coworker. We jumped into our dusty truck and headed out down the dry dirt road. The horizon shimmered with heat waves. My mind ran through worst-case scenarios. A wildfire raging beyond control, people trapped inside a wreck, or something worse I couldn't quite grasp. The desert was oddly silent. Usually, I'd spot small critters darting across the road or hear a hawk cry overhead. But this time, the whole place seemed to hold its breath, waiting for bad news. Manny fiddled with the radio, trying to reach the volunteer again, but all we got was crackling static mixed with faint, unclear noises. Each burst of static made me grip the steering wheel tighter. We rounded a curve and saw thick smoke curling into the sky. The sharp smell of burning rubber and metal cut through the truck's vents. We pulled up on gravel, tires crunching, and the volunteers waved us over. Their faces looked pale and drained. I stepped out and was immediately hit by heat so strong it felt like a blast from a furnace. The car was little more than a scorched frame now. The flames had mostly died out, leaving behind heavy black smoke. Manny and I exchanged uneasy looks. We'd handled burned vehicles before. Usually thieves dumped them after stripping out parts, but as we got closer, something caught my eye through the broken driver's side window. It looked like a bulky shape leaning on the steering wheel. I tried telling myself it was melted car seats, but moving around for a better look, I realized it wasn't. My stomach twisted. It was the remains of a person. Their body was burnt and twisted, with features unrecognizable. The door handle had melted in spots, and rope, yes, rope, was fused to the metal. This wasn't just an accident or joy ride gone wrong. Someone had tied this person up, shot them, and then set the car on fire. The weight of the scene pressed down on me like the desert itself had turned against us. Manny hurried back to the truck to call for proper backup. We stood near the smoking wreck, the smell clinging to our clothes. Time slowed to a crawl while we waited. One of the volunteers stood close by, stammering how they'd first thought it was just another stolen, burnt-out car until they looked inside. I scanned the brush around us, paranoid someone might be hiding there, watching us from behind a tumbleweed. Eventually, the fire crew arrived, spraying water over the hot remains and sending up clouds of steam. Then the police showed up, setting up a perimeter with their familiar yellow tape. I focused on small details, the half-burnt food wrappers on the ground, bullet holes in the metal frame, trying to count how many shots had been fired and wonder if the victim was alive when bound. I hated how my thoughts went dark, but I needed to gather every fact if I was going to get any rest. Hours passed as investigators picked through the ashes, taking photos and bagging scraps of rope. Manny stood off to the side, silent and shaken. He told me before he was used to gore from past jobs, but even he looked disturbed. What we found wasn't just violence, it was cruelty. Eventually, the site was declared secure, and the authorities sent us home, leaving a few deputies behind to guard the scene until forensic teams finished their work. As Manny and I drove back, the sky had deepened into a burnt orange. My head spun with everything we'd seen. The volunteer, wide-eyed and shaky, followed behind us in their car, still trying to process the nightmare they'd stumbled upon. By the time we got back to the station, rumors were already swirling about the haunted site. Word travels fast in small towns, and folks love a dark story. I overheard someone joking about how the spot had probably become the preserve's most popular camping place. People are drawn to grim legends, but there was nothing funny about the images still stuck in my mind. The burned seat, the twisted rope, the unrecognizable figure behind the wheel. I tried to distract myself with small tasks, sorting gear and writing notes for my next shift, but nothing worked. Deep down, I knew I'd never forget that day. The desert had always been tough, but I'd never imagined it could be so merciless. We still had no idea who that poor soul was or why they ended up on that lonely stretch of sand that night. Sleep escaped me. All I could do was lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the smell of burnt metal and flesh, the silence of the stunned onlookers. My mind refused to wander anywhere else. Instead, it clung to the thought that someone or something might still be out there, ready to do it again if they wanted. For the first time since I started this job, the open desert didn't feel like a place of freedom. It felt like a place where secrets went to die, the kind that should never see the light of day. I was still shaken from the burned car and the terrible discovery when we got another call that sent the station into near chaos. Our supervisor, usually calm and collected, was on the phone looking tense. A man on the line threatened to end it all, saying he had a cache of guns. He gave coordinates right on the edge of our area. I remember standing in the office, radio in hand, waiting to be sent out. My mind raced to dark possibilities. Was I about to find another horror like that burned-out car? The chief tried to keep the man on the phone, but he was talking about regret, nowhere else to go, wanting the desert to swallow him whole. My coworker, Parker, and I exchanged looks. We both knew we had to go, even if we felt unprepared for a crisis involving someone possibly armed. We climbed into the same dusty truck I'd driven to the burned car days before. The sun beat down hard, bleaching everything around us. Parker fiddled with the radio trying to get updates, but all we heard was broken chatter. Another ranger team had arrived first, so we sped up, hoping they'd talk the man down. A pit formed in my stomach. I feared the worst. When we neared the coordinates, we spotted a couple of trucks from the other team parked at awkward angles. One ranger stood nearby, signaling us to stay back. We slowed and stopped. I felt dread wave through the group. I got out and scanned the desert, looking for any sign of movement. The other ranger, a woman who looked exhausted, came over. Her face was tight with grief, like she'd been through this kind of nightmare before. She whispered that the man had gone through with his threat but hadn't died right away. He shot himself, then staggered a ways, leaving a trail of blood before collapsing. That news hit me like a weight on my chest. While Parker stayed by the truck, I moved forward to where the sand looked darker. Another ranger was kneeling there, shaking his head, radio in hand. The body was hidden behind some rocks, but the silence told me everything I needed to know. I didn't want to see. Nearby, the new ranger hugged herself. I'd heard she'd lost her husband, a fellow ranger, to suicide not long ago. Facing this again must have been like reopening a fresh wound. Parker asked if we should help, but the lead ranger said they had it under control, though her tired eyes told a different story. They told us to leave to avoid drowning in paperwork. Officially, it was a job for local police now. We stayed a moment, unsure of what to do, then got back in our truck. Sadness and guilt followed us as we left. The truck's interior baked under the sun, but I was cold inside, thinking about how these desert preserves I once loved had become places marked by human sorrow. The farther we drove, the more the bright sky turned harsh, as if the desert itself was tired of witnessing such pain. Back at the station, the mix of the burned car case and the recent tragedy hung over everything. People whispered about how the desert had always drawn wanderers, some seeking a fresh start, others an escape. I couldn't stand the tension anymore and decided to do something different after my shift. I drove out to one of the closed preserves for some late-night stargazing. Maybe silence and a sky full of shooting stars would remind me of the desert's beauty and help me breathe easier. For some strange reason, I brought my banjo. I'm no musician, but plucking a few off-key notes had a calming effect. Under the dark sky, I took the winding roads to the closed preserve. Behind me stretched empty land, no headlights in sight. I parked by an old picnic table near a dried riverbed. Above, the stars sparkled brighter than I'd seen in years. I climbed onto the table, the banjo awkward in my lap. Each note sounded small in the vast quiet, and a breeze scattered them across the desert. At first, I found some peace in that rhythm. Plunk, plunk, squeak, and laughed at my poor playing. But then my thoughts turned dark again. The burnt rope, bullet holes, the empty-eyed ranger, the next terrible scene waiting to be found. This place suddenly felt like I knew the evening hunt would be tough the moment I noticed how quickly the daylight was disappearing. I had spent the whole day sitting in my tree stand, thinking this trip into the woods was just like any other. The late fall cold had settled in, and the leaves beneath my feet had changed from bright gold to a darker shade, almost warning me. Still, I'd been out here enough times to understand how things usually go. When I finally took the shot, my mind went blank, like on autopilot. I squeezed the trigger, heard the sharp crack, and watched the deer drop. There was an instant rush, a sudden burst of relief, because I had waited all day for this exact moment. But as soon as I climbed down, reality started creeping in. It was twilight now, and I had a big 8-point buck with me. The 5-mile walk back to my truck suddenly felt much longer in the fading light. I had left my gear cart about 2 miles away from the spot where I shot, so carrying the deer that first stretch didn't bother me. My breath showed in the cold air as small clouds, and the forest was quieter than normal. Too quiet, like something was out of place. I told myself it was just the usual stillness after hunting season. Animals sense the disturbance and scatter. When I got to the cart, everything went from annoying to terrible in a flash. I tried to strap the deer in, but the moment I started to pull the cart, the left wheel jerked, making a sharp snap like a gunshot ringing through the trees. Before I could react, the wheel was hanging by a thin piece of metal. Then it broke off completely. I looked at the broken wheel and laughed a little at my own carelessness for not checking the cart beforehand. But that laugh died quickly as I realized I had no backup plan. No partner, no cell service, just me and a deer that wasn't going anywhere on its own. My only option was to sling the deer over my shoulders and start walking. I hadn't gone more than a few hundred yards when I heard coyotes howling faintly in the distance. I tried to convince myself they would stay near the gut pile I had left behind, hoping that would keep them busy. But every time I stopped to catch my breath, it sounded like more joined in. Their cries echoed between the trees, getting louder, and suddenly I was scared I might become their next meal if I didn't keep moving. You would think after all the hunting seasons I've done, I'd have nerves of steel, but the sound of that pack made my skin crawl. I pushed forward, ignoring the burn in my legs and the pain in my shoulders from carrying the deer. My goal was to get past the open clearing and reach higher ground. Ahead, I knew there was a swamp, a real nightmare to cross, especially in the dark. The muddy, mossy ground made each step risky. More than once, I slipped on the slick earth, imagining glowing eyes watching me from behind crooked tree trunks. The howls grew louder and bolder, and I felt the terrifying sense of being surrounded. When I finally stopped to shift the deer on my shoulders, it almost slipped off. My breathing was ragged, and the forest silence pressed down on me heavily. I tried to listen for the coyotes, but the silence made it worse, like they were playing a game, waiting to get closer. Pushing myself onward, I kept thinking about how what had started as a normal day of hunting had turned into a nightmare in seconds, and I still had miles to go. I wasn't sure how much energy I had left, but I knew I couldn't stop. The swamp behind me felt like it wanted to swallow me whole, and every snap of a branch made me picture a pack of snarling jaws at my ankles. My arms went numb under the deer's weight, and my lungs burned, but I kept telling myself just one more step, just a little farther. When I finally emerged from the thickest part of the bog, my boots found solid ground. The relief lasted barely a moment because the howls and yips were dangerously close now. It sounded like at least a dozen animals moving through the trees together, like a hunting team. I could feel them flanking me, slipping through every bush and undergrowth with new movement. I forced myself into a slow run, the deer bouncing on my back, mud and water dripping down my legs. My grip was slippery on the small axe I carried, but it was the only weapon I had. The more I listened, the more I realized I wasn't being followed by a single group of footsteps. It was a swarm, a living net closing in on me. I remember seeing the fence up ahead, a tall, dark shape against the moonlit sky. I focused all my energy on reaching it, ignoring the pain in my muscles. The closer I got, the louder the pack seemed, like they knew my escape route and wanted to trap me. My breath rattled in my chest as I threw myself up and over the fence, deer and all, not even hesitating when my jacket snagged on a piece of twisted wire. Landing on the other side knocked the air from my lungs. I hit the ground hard, sprawling forward, and the deer rolled off me. My hands scrambled for my knife or the axe, ready to fight if I had to. But instead of shapes jumping over the fence, I heard the animal slam against it, snarling and clawing at the chain links. For a few gut-wrenching seconds, I thought they might break through. I braced myself, digging my boots into the earth like I could spring away any second. Then suddenly it went quiet. The pack was tired and restless, but eventually, they moved back into the darkness. My hands shook so badly I could barely pick up the deer. When I finally reached my truck, I almost collapsed, half from relief, half from the terror still clinging to me. I wanted to leave right away, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I locked the doors, slid into the driver's seat, and let exhaustion take over. Maybe I dozed for a few minutes, maybe longer. Then a sharp knock on the window startled me. A flashlight beam cut across the cab, and outside stood a conservation officer, with a look that said he'd never seen anyone quite like me before. I cracked the window, still clutching my axe, and managed to tell him what happened. The broken cart, the chase, the fence. He kept glancing at the blood on my clothes and the deer in the back, like he was trying to decide if I was crazy. But when he checked my hunting license, his whole posture relaxed. He even laughed a little, calling me a wild man, then told me to get some rest. That moment felt strange, like the night had been a fever dream, and his calm was the only real thing grounding me. After he left, I sat there breathing as evenly as I could. Part of me wanted to drive away and never come back. Another part was already thinking about next season, because apparently I don't learn. I finally fell asleep as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Even though I had gotten out of that swamp in one piece, something about the woods felt different after that night, like it had shown me a side I'd never seen before. I was by myself at home that afternoon, slouched on my old couch flipping through channels I didn't really care about. The sky outside was a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain, so I assumed the day would be as quiet and boring as any other. But after a while, I noticed a few deer wandering into my yard. Usually, seeing deer would give me a peaceful feeling, something I'd watch for a moment before going back to whatever I was doing. This time, though, something about them seemed wrong. The air outside felt oddly still, like every noise had been sucked away. At first, the deer looked normal, but I kept staring longer than usual. That's when I saw one of their back legs was bent in a way I couldn't even describe. Every time it took a step, the leg moved in a direction that made no sense. I leaned closer to the window, my brain trying hard to understand what I was seeing. The more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't just one leg. Maybe 3 or 4 of the deer had some unnatural curve in their joints. I told myself it must be a trick of the light or a strange angle, anything to explain what I was seeing. But the way their legs moved didn't look right at all. It felt like they were learning how to walk all over again, but doing it wrong. They stood there, nibbling on the grass, sometimes glancing my way like they knew I was watching from inside. I didn't want to move and scare them away or, worse, get their full attention. Every time one jerked its head up, ears twitching, my breath caught in my throat. The yard was completely silent. No birds chirping, no leaves rustling, and that quiet made every awkward step stick in my mind. My heart hammered with each movement they made. Eventually, one deer started walking toward the tree line at the edge of the yard, and the others followed. That's when I saw something even more disturbing. Their bodies seemed to be growing as they walked away. At first, I was sure I was imagining things, but I couldn't ignore how their torsos stretched and their necks lengthened to impossible sizes. I froze, trying to make sense of a scene that should never have been possible. Every logical part of me screamed that animals don't just change like that. The deer with the most twisted leg was lagging behind, its back bent at a strange angle, ribs pressing oddly against its fur. It made me want to look away, but I couldn't. It seemed to sense how disturbed I was because it stopped, turned its head toward me, and made a noise unlike any normal deer sound. A warped groan buzzing through the air that left my stomach in knots. I gripped the windowsill so hard my knuckles ached. The other deer didn't seem bothered by the strange changes happening to them. They kept moving deeper into the woods, each leg bending at uncomfortable angles. Their shadows stretched long and thin like something out of a nightmare, merging with the dim light. By the time they were halfway hidden behind the trees, I barely recognized them as deer anymore. They looked like shadows of something else, something not meant to be seen in daylight. I stood there in a daze, staring long after they vanished. The rest of the day, I replayed the scene in my mind, trying to convince myself I had seen it wrong. Maybe it was a trick of the sun, or maybe I was just tired. But every time I tried to reason it away, I remembered the way that leg bent or how their necks stretched impossibly long, and my stomach twisted again. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise outside made me jump. Even the softest rustling of leaves had me picturing those warped shapes lurking just beyond the yard. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see one press its long head against the glass. My mind refused to forget. The memory was too sharp, too real. I thought about warning someone, maybe calling a wildlife officer or a neighbor, but what would I say? The deer in my yard looked like something from a horror story? No one would believe me. I wasn't even sure I believed myself, but the fear was real. My hands shook every time I walked past that window. I couldn't bring myself to open the door, worried that if I stepped outside, I might come face to face with those twisted creatures, or whatever they really were. Hours passed. I switched on every light in the house, sure that staying in the dark was a bad idea. My mind pictured those deer creeping closer while I slept, their legs bending more, their eyes glowing with some unnatural awareness. I imagined them pushing against the walls with those warped limbs, slowly changing shape as they tried to slip through any gap. When the sun finally rose, I was worn out, both mentally and physically. I worked up the nerve to look outside, but the yard was empty. Morning light filled the space, and for a moment I wondered if I had let my imagination run wild. Still, a heavy feeling of dread hung in the air, a feeling that something was deeply wrong with what I'd witnessed. This wasn't just a lame deer or an injury. It was an impossible change, a glimpse of something beyond what should be real. Even now, whenever I look outside, I brace myself. Part of me is certain I'll see those shapes again, drifting among the trees, limbs bending and stretching into awful forms. And part of me wonders if someday they'll come back, maybe this time closer than before. The thought alone makes me restless, scanning the yard with wary eyes, waiting for the slightest sign of movement that might prove my worst fears true. I've always been someone who needs to get outdoors to escape the concrete and noise and let the forest remind me what silence really sounds like. I'm not the kind of person who does it for Instagram or brags about spending weekends in nature. I need it like I need sleep. That's probably why I was all ears when my friend Josh told me about a creek behind a ridge about 2 hours from my town. He said no one really went there anymore. The old path was basically wiped out when a service road was put in a few years back, and people just forgot about it. To me, that sounded like a blessing. Josh is the type of guy always full of half-formed ideas and hidden shortcuts, so I asked him to explain it all. He promised if I followed his instructions exactly, I'd find a fishing spot people dream about. Deep pools, shaded banks hanging over the water, no tourists, no hikers, no footprints in the mud. Just me, the creek, and a quiet so pure it only exists in places the world has left behind. So Friday night, I packed my stuff. Fishing rod, small tackle box, a couple of sandwiches, a bottle of water, and a .40 caliber pistol I carry when I'm in remote places. Plus all the usual stuff you need for a day out. I'm not a survivalist or anything, but after enough solo trips, you learn not to take chances. You prepare for a good time, but also for something bad. Saturday morning came. The sky was a bright blue that practically begged me to get going. The drive was pretty calm, just me cruising through quiet country roads and past old barns, deer crossing signs here and there, and that nervous excitement before a new adventure. I reached the last turnoff Josh told me about, a gravel pullout at the edge of a forest. Sure enough, there was a worn slope going down with no signs, no markers, just a faint trail worn long before the road showed up. I parked, checked my gear quickly, and headed down. Sunlight filtered through tall pines, their long shadows dancing on my skin, almost making me forget I was heading into a place that didn't really care if I came back. There was a thrill in it, being somewhere few people go, where cell signal disappears, and the only noise comes from wind and birds. That's the point, isn't it? No one to bother me and no one to bother with me. The trail looked better than I thought it would. It was narrow, sure, but solid dirt with a few switchbacks and a steady downhill slope telling me I was leaving the familiar behind. I moved at a steady pace, heart light, sharp. Somewhere below, the creek waited like a secret. About 45 minutes in, I reached the first switchback. The drop was steady but not harsh, no need for poles or careful steps. Pines lined both sides, their needles soft underfoot, the air cool and fresh. Birds sang above, and for a while, I let myself fall into the rhythm. One footstep after another, my fishing rod tapping gently against my pack. Around 2 miles in, things changed. The trail curved left, clinging to the ridge side, when I came across a fork I wasn't warned about. Josh's directions were usually very detailed, almost obsessive. He'd said no forks, no detours, just follow the trail all the way down. But here it was, 2 narrow paths splitting at some bushes. One veered left toward a patch of sycamores, the other right, steeper and rougher, diving deeper into the canyon. I stopped, biting my cheek, scanning the trees as if the right path might show itself. The left trail seemed to curve around the ridge, maybe skirting the canyon. The right one dropped sharply where the water should be, so I chose right. First, it didn't feel right. The trail narrowed but stayed clear, bordered by rocks and some oaks. Half a mile later, it started closing in with shrubs and young trees pressing against me, branches snagging my sleeves. I ducked under fallen limbs twice, and the ground grew wetter, mud slippery beneath my boots. I pushed forward, thinking it would open up again, but then I noticed the silence. At first, it was just the fading of birdsong and the sharp sound of my boots on the ground. Soon, it was like the forest had swallowed its own voice. I paused, hands on hips, catching my breath. That stillness made the hairs on my neck stand up. I looked back up the trail, and there, about 50 yards away, a figure flickered just behind a tree. Dark hair, pale skin, maybe a woman. I froze. My heart hammered. Logic told me it was just another hiker or a local, but that trail was a mess. Nobody in their right mind would come this way unless they were as stubborn or foolish as me. I called out, "Hey, you okay back there?" No answer. No footsteps. I waited, counting silently, 1, 2, 3. But the woods stayed dead silent. My skin crawled at the thought. I shifted my pack and gave the forest another hard look, then turned back down the path. The trees thickened until the trail vanished ahead, replaced by underbrush and scattered rocks. Across the narrow ravine, I almost missed a makeshift camp. A tarp hanging low between two trees, a pile of firewood stacked under an oak, and an old cooler tipped on its side. Someone was or had been living out here. My stomach twisted at the thought. Maybe I hadn't imagined the figure after all. Then I heard footsteps, soft, careful sounds moving through the brush to my left. I froze, ears straining, throat dry. I pulled out my phone, not to call, no signal out here, but to use the screen as a mirror. I angled it behind me, and there, about 30 feet back, was the woman. Thin, tangled hair, dark, baggy clothes. She wasn't walking straight toward me, but weaving through the trees, eyes flicking between the ground and where I stood. I didn't want to wait any longer. I turned and headed back uphill, keeping a steady pace, pretending not to notice her. I didn't run yet, just moved fast enough to show I was leaving. My hands itched for my pistol, but pulling it out felt like escalating things I wasn't ready for. The trail narrowed. Squeezed by a fallen tree, I jumped over, gasping, tasting copper on my tongue. My mind raced through half-baked plans. Call out if I saw her, fire a warning shot if I had to. The sounds behind me grew louder. Sticks snapping, breathless gasps, the slap of bare feet on dirt. Enough! I yanked out my pistol and fired 2 shots into the air. The echo cracked through the trees like a whip. For a heartbeat, the forest froze. Then, I heard retreating footsteps pounding back the way they came. I spun around and caught a glimpse of her, hair flying, arms pumping, running like something wild, burned by the gunfire. I holstered the pistol, wiped sweat from my brow, and kept climbing. No stopping now, not until I saw my truck. The climb out of the canyon felt twice as long on the way back. My legs burned, lungs strained, muscles tight, waiting for the sound of footsteps to return behind me. But the forest went still again. Too still, like it was watching, holding its breath. I kept my head down, pushed up the trail, counting every bend and switchback, sweat pouring down my spine. I told myself over and over, don't look back. Don't give her the satisfaction. Don't show her you're scared. But every now and then, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. Just shadows, just wind teasing the undergrowth. When I reached the fork again, I barely slowed. I could see how I'd been led wrong. The overgrown path I'd taken was subtle enough to pull someone in without thinking. Josh's directions had been clear, no forks, no turns, which meant that path shouldn't have existed. My gut twisted at that thought. The last mile was a blur. The sky dimmed, sun dipping behind the ridge, the woods turning a blue-gray twilight that makes everything look off. Every sound was louder. The snap of twigs, the whisper of wind, my ragged breathing. My hands stayed near the pistol, alert to any noise. When I finally saw the edge of the trees and my truck parked on the gravel, it felt like a dream. I stumbled up the last stretch, boots slipping, heart pounding like it wanted out. I threw my gear in the back seat without ceremony, climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment. Hands on the wheel, forehead resting against it, letting the shaking pass through me. My mouth was dry, tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. When I finally started the engine, the sound almost made me jump. The drive home was silent for 2 hours. No music, no podcasts. Just the hum of tires and the endless replay of the woman's pale face, ragged clothes, and how she ran when I fired. When I got home, I didn't unpack. I just sat on the couch and called Josh. He answered on the second ring, voice calm and easy. "Hey, how was it?" catch anything. My throat was raw. Hey, quick question. You sure about that trail? You said no forks, right? Yeah, man. Straight as an arrow. It's been a couple years since I was there. But it's simple. He paused. Why? Did you get lost or something? There was a fork, about 2 miles in. Took me off the main trail and down toward a ravine. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Josh, are you sure you remember right? There was a pause, long enough to make every hair. I woke up last night choking for air. The echoes of piercing noises bounced inside my mind. It took me a moment to remember where I was, curled up in my own bed, tangled in blankets. My thoughts immediately went to my old pet ferret, the one that passed away a few weeks back. My mind kept going back to how huge it had grown near the end, like the size of a big cat, maybe even larger, and the way it made this low croaking sound instead of the usual squeaks during its last days. It was almost like it was aware of something none of us understood. Sometimes, I'd find it standing on its hind legs so long it felt like a staring contest. Its eyes were eerily calm, locked onto me in a way no pet should ever do. My mom had tried to get me to look at the ferret's body after it died, but I brushed her off. I thought she was just being strange about it. Turns out, maybe she had a reason. Not long after the ferret died, I went for a walk to clear my head, taking a friend along. We joked and teased each other, just messing around like usual. We both needed a laugh after the weirdness of the last few weeks. Then I noticed a deer standing a few yards ahead, motionless like a statue, almost as if it had been placed there on purpose. Normally, a deer would run away as soon as it spotted us, but this one just stared. My friend, braver than me, tried calling it over with little clicks and finger snaps. Strangely, the deer obeyed like it somehow knew us. We took a silly selfie with the deer right behind us. It didn't just look at the camera, it seemed to look through it like it saw something inside the lens. We shrugged it off at first, amazed at how calm it was, but neither of us could shake the feeling that something was wrong. We even talked about how its eyes felt more intense than a normal animal's. But then we let it go. About 15 minutes after we parted ways with that deer, we saw it again far off. Only this time, it was standing upright on its hind legs, bobbing along in a stiff, awkward run. We both burst out laughing, half shocked and half not believing what we saw. Nobody would ever believe a deer running on 2 legs like some circus act. But that image stayed with me. Shouldn't have happened. It made me think about how my ferret used to stand with its arms hanging by its sides, almost like it was copying a person. The coincidence was just too weird. I filed it away under too strange to explain and tried to move on. Later that night, though, I couldn't stop thinking about that deer. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it limping on 2 legs. Suddenly, I was back in my room thinking about the ferret, remembering the day it suddenly died. Then the screeching came again, maybe a memory or something else. I don't know. It shook me so much I swore my vision blurred for a second. I even thought I heard claws scraping on the floor, but when I looked around, nothing was there. Now I'm lying here again, unable to get comfortable. I keep feeling like I'm being watched, even in the dark. It's not really fear, more like a creeping tension at the back of my neck telling me maybe the deer and my ferret shared a connection. Part of me wants to call my mom and ask what she really saw when she wanted me to look at the ferret's body. The rest of me is too scared to move. I promised myself I'd try to be logical tomorrow, maybe look up some strange animal behavior or local wildlife. But tonight drags on, and I suspect that no Google search will explain any of this. Something is happening, and I don't know if it started with my ferret's last breath or if that was just my first glimpse of something darker. Whatever it is, I'm beginning to think it's coming for me. Step by step, scratch by scratch. I needed to get away. At least, that's what I told myself when I pulled up to the motel. The place was as plain as you'd expect. A gray box off the side of a quiet road with a big flashing sign saying there was a bar inside. From the outside, it looked normal enough, but looks can be deceiving. The whole place felt tenser than it should as I dragged my bag toward the front desk. The hallway wasn't fully closed off. One side opened right to the outside, letting a cold dampness creep in. A few stray cats prowled around, hissing at each other. I remember thinking the building's design was strange. Why would a hallway leading to rooms be so open? Still, I checked in, thinking I'd drown the uneasy memories of the deer and the ferret in the motel's bar. I dropped my stuff in the room, cleaned up, and went downstairs wanting a few hours to forget everything. That night, the bar was lively enough. There was a small stage for amateur acts, a few tired travelers lingering at the counter, half watching a guy sing out of tune. I sat alone, ordered a drink, and let the buzz of voices and clinking glasses make me forget how messed up my life felt. Almost, I convinced myself the two-legged deer was a dream. But when the bar closed and I stumbled back into the open hallway, I knew the normal feeling wouldn't last. I heard a slow, shuffling sound around the corner, like something heavy being dragged. I called out, voice shaky. Normally, I wouldn't pry, but a strange feeling told me to check. I crept forward and saw a woman, maybe in her late 40s or early 50s, overweight and breathing hard. Her hair was stuck to her face, and her eyes darted nervously like she expected something to jump out at her. I tried to ask if she was okay, but she interrupted with strange, slurred words about needing a waiter. It was such a random thing to say in an empty hallway that I paused. Maybe she was having a medical emergency, so I stepped closer. Then she turned her head a full 180 degrees. There was a loud crack like a tree branch breaking in a storm. In that moment, all reason disappeared, and panic took over. Her face twisted backward while the rest of her body faced me. Her wide eyes are burned into my memory. Her lips parted, making a faint rasping sound. She moaned quietly and then started moving, not walking exactly. Her feet dragged along the floor, leaving scratch marks, like she was being pulled by her ankles. But no one was there. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. The flickering lights above gave me brief flashes of her twisted form. She kept gliding forward, disappearing around the corner. Part of me wanted to follow, to ask if she needed help, or even if she was human. But I stayed still, melting into the wall. After what felt like forever, she was gone. That's when I ran back to my room, shoes slapping loudly on the linoleum floor. Inside, I locked every lock, wedged a chair under the doorknob like in a bad horror movie, but it felt all too real. I collapsed on the bed, heart pounding, trying to find an explanation. Maybe she was sick or hallucinating, but that didn't explain how her head turned all the way around or how she slid across the floor leaving those marks. Sleep was useless. I might have nodded off once or twice, but I was jolted awake each time by low, wild moans outside my door. Less human, more like a big animal in pain. The scratching afterwards sounded deliberate, like something wanted to tear through the wood. I just sat there, back against the headboard, staring at the door. I didn't trust myself to turn on the light. Eventually, the scratching stopped and was replaced by a terrible silence. Worse because I didn't know if it was really gone or just waiting. I checked my phone. It was well past midnight. That's when it hit me. Maybe all these things, the huge ferret, the two-legged deer, the twisted neck woman, were pieces of some terrible puzzle. And I was stuck right in the middle. By morning, I felt 10 years older. My body ached from tension, and my head throbbed with questions I couldn't answer. But one thing was clear. I couldn't handle another night like that. Whatever this was, it wasn't going away on its own. Crazy as it sounds, I knew I had to find it, face it, stop it, whatever it took. I muttered to myself, setting a date, August 15th. Somehow, it felt far enough away to prepare, but close enough that I wouldn't lose my courage. I didn't know if I was facing one creature or many, but I had to try. The open hallway outside felt heavy, even in daylight, darker than the rest of the motel. A breeze blew through, carrying a faint smell of rot that made my skin crawl. I still don't know if I imagined it or if it was real. Either way, I hurried out, determined to get ready for whatever was coming next. I've learned the worst part isn't the fear, it's not knowing when it'll strike again. And I've had enough. I convinced my closest friend, Alex, to join me on a spring deer hunting trip in northern Montana. We drove all day from Missoula, the truck humming along empty roads lined with leftover snow. By nightfall, we reached the small town of Pine Ridge, just one gas station and a short gravel airstrip next to a frozen pond. Early the next morning, a local bush pilot met us by his worn-out float plane. He loaded our backpacks, rifles, and a week's worth of dried meat. Then he pushed the throttle, and the plane rose above endless hills until the forests below looked like a thick green carpet. About 45 minutes later, we landed at Big Hollow Airstrip, a narrow dirt strip wedged between steep canyon cliffs. The pilot waved once and took off, leaving us alone with a heavy quiet that felt loud in my ears. We started hiking north on a narrow path next to Monument Creek. Patches of old snow still clung to the cold, shaded banks. After lunch, we left the trail and pushed into a small, unnamed valley. Young pine trees grew so close together we had to squeeze sideways to get through. That's when I spotted the first sign. A sapling about the thickness of a finger stood inches from my face. Halfway up its trunk was a perfect V-shaped bite mark, like someone pressed a huge canine tooth into the bark. I looked around. Every sapling nearby had the same mark, one bite at about knee level, no more. Hundreds of trees were all scarred the same way. Wolves, Alex guessed, but his voice was weak. I just shrugged, trying to make sense of it. We reached a small meadow higher up and set up camp. Cold fog crept in as the sun slipped behind Black Bear Ridge. We roasted jerky over a tiny stove and tried to joke about the strange tooth marks on the trees. But the jokes didn't land. That night, inside my tent, I woke to a low sound drifting through the forest. It wasn't the wind or any animal I knew. It was a humming, slow and steady, like someone quietly singing without words. The note rose and fell, weaving between the trees. Alex's breathing caught in the dark. "Did it just say my name?" he whispered. I didn't answer because I thought I heard it too. My hand tightened around the rifle next to my sleeping bag. The humming lasted what felt like hours, then stopped suddenly. The silence made my ears ring. A twig snapped just outside the tent. Alex and I held our breath. Nothing else moved. Somehow we fell asleep again. At first light, the orange glow of dawn touched the tent walls. Alex unzipped the door and froze. "Dude," he said, "look." All our gear had been moved. Our 2 rifles, ammo belts, and food bags were arranged in a perfect circle about 6 feet across, surrounding the tent like a strange fence. Inside the circle, the dirt was swept clean, no footprints, no drag marks. A neat row of fresh sticks lay at the edge, each smooth, green, and marked with the same single-tooth notch. The sticks pointed east, straight up the ridge. Alex looked pale. "This is a message," he whispered. I wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but a sour feeling twisted in my gut. A mix of anger, fear, and a need to find out who or what was playing with us. "We follow the trail," I said, loading my rifle. "We find whoever did this and make them stop." Alex didn't argue. We left the tent and most of our supplies behind, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the first marked stick behind us. The fog swallowed our small camp, and the silent woods waited. We stepped into the fog, following the row of notched sticks pointing uphill. Every few hundred steps, we found another branch, the bite marks still dripping sap. The air smelled sour, like old meat left to rot in the sun. Soon thick clouds rolled over the ridge. Sleet rattled our hoods, and the trees turned into gray shadows. I kept my rifle ready, but my hands shook from cold and nerves I didn't want to admit. At the 5th marker, Alex stopped. "Hear that?" I held my breath. A long, raspy inhale drifted through the trees, then a slow, rough exhale, like sandpaper. It was below us, not around us. We pushed forward until Alex's boot cracked through the ground. He yelped and scrambled back. The mossy floor hid a hole bigger than a cabin, its edges marked with pale stone. Fog spilled over like steam. We crept to the edge and shone our lights down. My beam hit a jumble of bones, jawbones piled knee-high around the sinkhole. Deer, elk, bear, some huge, with double-hinged jaws I'd never seen in any field guide. Each bone was missing a single canine tooth. My stomach twisted. Who would do this? From deep inside the pit came slow, wet, labored breathing. I aimed my flashlight down, and something gray and slick shifted, like a huge back rolling against the stone. Then my light fizzled and died. I grabbed Alex's sleeve. "Run!" We turned just as a thunderous scrape echoed from the hole. Bones tumbled as something heavy surged upward. Trees shook. I felt the ground tremble beneath my boots. We sprinted downhill. Sleet stung our faces. Branches whipped behind us like whips. Trunks snapped, cracked, boomed closer and closer. I risked a glance back. All I saw was waving trees, but the crashing sound chased us like an invisible train. A fallen log blocked the narrow saddle ahead. Alex slipped on the wet bark and slid sideways. I hauled him over. My pack tore open, spilling survival gear across the trail. We left it and kept running. The ridge ended in a loose rock chute. We skidded down, shoes scraping sparks, and burst onto the banks of Monument Creek. Snowmelt water roared, waist-deep and icy enough to bite. With no time to think, we plunged in. The cold stole my breath, but the crashing stopped above us. Whatever had hunted us did not follow past the trees. Shaking from cold, we trudged 3 miles along the creek's edge until the dirt airstrip at Big Hollow appeared through the mist. A Forest Service pilot warming up his small plane spotted us. He wrapped us in blankets, shoved heat packs into our gloves, and radioed the ranger station. At the clinic in Hamilton that night, a deputy listened to our story with raised eyebrows. "There are plenty of wolves up there," he said. "That probably explains it." But on my smashed Action camera's memory card, one photo survived. It showed Alex and me asleep in the tent at dawn. Just outside the ring of rifles stood a tall, thin shadow with 5 long fingers. In its hand was a fresh stick, still green and bleeding sap, ready to place behind our heads. Alex keeps asking if we should go back for proof. I tell him Montana's mountains can keep their secrets. Every time I hear a low hum in the wind, I remember that breath from the dark, and I know I will never climb Black Bear Ridge again. I went to bed much later than I planned, almost midnight, and all I wanted was a few hours of solid rest. The place I live in isn't exactly welcoming after dark. It sits on a steep hill, surrounded by tall trees that block most of the light once the sun goes down. Usually, it feels calm and quiet, but that night something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., my eyes snapped open. At first, I couldn't figure out what had woke me up. There was no loud noise, no window rattling, just this feeling that I wasn't alone. My throat felt dry, so I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound. The hallway was almost completely dark, except for a thin line of moonlight stretching across the floor. I felt like the whole house was hiding secrets I didn't want to find out. By the time I reached the kitchen, my nerves were on edge. The faucet squeaked when I turned it on, and the water tasted stale, like it had been sitting in the pipes too long. Normally, I'd check my phone or listen to a podcast to calm down, but something told me to stay silent and keep alert. When I returned to my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and glanced out the window. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but the moon was bright enough to show the shapes of branches stretching out at my level, like a spooky path hanging in the air. At first, the trees seemed empty, just moving leaves and twisting limbs, but then I saw a darker figure I couldn't explain. It was sitting on a thick branch, hunched but still taking up a lot of space. That shape was wrong. Too tall, too sharp-edged, and definitely watching me. I caught a faint glimmer of red where its eyes should have been, a color that didn't belong in the silver moonlight. My heart pounded in my ears, and I couldn't figure out what I was seeing. Animal? Human? Something else? It had long, thin limbs that looked stretched out more than normal, yet it seemed comfortable balancing in the branches. I swallowed hard and leaned in, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But it wasn't. This was real. It made every muscle in my body tense, and it stared at me like it was used to hiding in the dark, rarely caught off guard. After what felt like forever but might have been only 10 or 15 seconds, the figure moved, tilting its head in a way that felt like curiosity or worse, recognition. I thought about grabbing my phone, calling someone, anyone, but I couldn't move. A strange kind of fascination held me still. Just as I started to calm down, the creature disappeared from the branch in one smooth motion. I jumped off the bed and rushed to the window, half expecting to see it lying on the ground below. Instead, I caught a glimpse of it running through the bushes at an incredible speed. The undergrowth shook like something big was pushing through, heading deeper into the shadows of the forest. Even after it vanished, I stayed frozen at the window, replaying what I'd seen in my mind. I couldn't have imagined it. It was too clear, too disturbing. The rest of the night I sat there, lights on, barely blinking. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced with questions. Would it come back? Had it been watching me all along? Would it have just kept staring if I hadn't noticed it first? When dawn finally started to show faintly over the treetops, I still felt stuck, trapped by that silent moment. That moonlit glimpse of something beyond reason stayed with me, and the worst part was, it seemed to know I was there the entire time, as if this was its home and I had stumbled into a secret I wasn't meant to see. I barely slept a wink after that. I was awake before sunrise, unable to rest. As soon as the sunlight began creeping in, I forced myself away from the window. My eyes were gritty, my head throbbed, and my nerves were shredded. But I needed proof, some sign that last night hadn't been a hallucination. When I first looked out at the trees in the bright morning, it felt like the forest was mocking me, showing off how peaceful it was now, with no eerie shadows or terrifying shapes. Everything looked normal, just like any other stretch of woods on a clear day. But I knew better than to be fooled by daylight. After gulping down a cup of coffee, I decided to walk around the edge of my land. Honestly, I could have used more caffeine, maybe something stronger, but I had to do this while I still had some courage. The sun was surprisingly bright, making me squint as I stepped outside. It felt like the world was daring me to see nothing scary. I wasn't buying it. My boots crunched over patchy grass as I moved toward the tree line, scanning every inch of the ground. Part of me felt foolish, like I was hunting for clues, footprints or claw marks, but I needed something to confirm what I'd seen. I kept spotting broken twigs, flattened brush, and places where the pine needles looked disturbed. It could have been deer or some other animal, but each odd sign made my stomach tighten, reminding me of that creature stomping through the woods. When I finally went back inside, my hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from remembering those glowing red eyes. I grabbed the nearest notebook and wrote down every detail. How tall it looked, that strange posture, the lightning speed it moved through the bushes. My handwriting was messy, ink smudged where I pressed too hard. Reliving the moment made my nerves raw again. I spent the next couple of hours sitting at my laptop, diving into the darkest parts of online forums. I read about everything, from local legends to strange creatures in the forest. None of the stories matched what I saw exactly, though. I kept scrolling, searching for any mention of long limbs and glowing eyes perched in trees. My head spun from all the folklore, most of it bizarre. There was a lot of nonsense, but just enough believable detail to keep my worry simmering. By early afternoon, I was so jumpy that every small sound made me flinch. The fridge humming felt way too loud. The clock ticking sounded sharp. I'd snap my head toward the window at every little movement, convinced I'd see that tall figure hiding in the branches. But there was nothing, just leaves moving in the breeze and sunlight shining through. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to lower my guard. The hardest part was this nagging thought that wouldn't leave my mind. Did that thing really see me, or was I trespassing in its territory? The question ate at me so much that by late afternoon, I found myself pacing the living room, trying to keep busy with small chores. No luck. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red eyes staring back. Before I knew it, the sun was setting, and night fell fast in these woods. As the light disappeared, my feeling of safety did too. The house felt less like home and more like a thin shield against something that should never have been this close. I left every light on, even the porch light, just to keep the darkness away. But no amount of bulbs could push away that feeling of dread. The house creaked and groaned like it always does at night, but now every little sound made my heart race. I settled by the window with a flashlight, watching the branches turn into spindly shadows in the moonlight. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I didn't dare look away for more than a few seconds. Part of me wanted to see it again, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. Another part of me dreaded that it might already be watching, hiding in the leaves, waiting for the right moment to show itself. The thought of seeing it again made me nervous. I knew if it happened, it would prove last night wasn't some weird accident. The clock moved closer to midnight. Still no sign of anything, but the tightness in my chest didn't ease. Deep down, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a darker secret, something just out of sight. When the night finally ended, one thing was clear. I wasn't alone here. This place I'd called home for so long didn't feel like mine anymore. Something else was out there, and it knew I was here more than I ever wanted it to. I always believed I knew every corner of my grandparents' land near Larkspur, Arkansas, like it was my own private playground. One late afternoon, with the sun hanging low and painting the horizon a weak orange, I wanted a little time alone. So, I wandered into the nearby woods, the same patch of trees I had explored countless times before. There was an old, rusty wire fence and a rough path covered in dry leaves, all as familiar as the back of my hand. The house was close enough that I didn't think anything could really go wrong. I just needed some fresh air. But the air felt heavy, almost like it was pressing against my skin. Every step I took sounded louder than usual. Normally, the woods were peaceful, a chorus of crickets and birdsong. But that day, the silence was strange and uncomfortable. I called out for my mom just to break the quiet, even though I didn't really expect an answer. No one replied. A small knot of worry started to grow inside me, like the whole place had shifted without my noticing. Then I heard my name. It sounded like my mom's voice, but it was off, twisted in a way I couldn't place. I hesitated, but my first instinct was to answer. I called back, asking if she needed me. No reply. I looked around, trying to find where the voice came from. My heart was pounding so hard it was hard to think straight. I ran through all the reasons my mom could be in the woods, but none of them made sense. That voice, it was familiar but wrong, like a bad echo. Suddenly, I saw movement behind a thick tree trunk. At first, I thought it was a deer or a stray dog, but then something tall and gray appeared, a figure bigger than any person I knew. Its skin looked old and torn in places, like bark peeling off a tree. Its teeth caught the sunlight, sharp and shining, making my stomach twist. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, every nerve screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure shifted slowly, almost like it was watching how I'd react. That was all the warning I needed. My legs finally obeyed, and I spun around, running as fast as I could back toward the house. Branches snapped under my feet, and brush scraped my skin. The woods felt darker, as if the sun was being swallowed on purpose. My lungs burned, and tears stung my eyes, but I didn't dare look back. When I reached the clearing, the porch light was just coming on, casting a faint, shaky glow over the yard. I collapsed onto the grass, gasping. Mom and my stepdad were inside, talking calmly about dinner, completely unaware of what I'd just run from. My whole body trembled as I got up and went inside. I didn't want them to see how shaken I was. Telling them felt impossible. They would probably think it was just a kid's wild imagination or a scary daydream. But I knew what I had seen. I practically locked myself in my room, pressing my back to the door and closing my eyes. I replayed every moment of that evening, too afraid to look out the window. I was sure something terrible might be watching me. All I could do was wrestle with the thought that the old family stories whispered in low voices might be more than just stories. The land I thought was safe suddenly didn't feel that way anymore. I knew I'd never see those woods the same way again. That night dragged on forever. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ragged figure crouched in the corner of my room, waiting. My bed used to feel like a safe place, but now it felt exposed. Every sound outside, a rustling leaf, a loose gutter piece rattling, became a possible threat. I barely slept, and when I did, nightmares took over. I'd see that twisted face and sharp grin everywhere I looked. I woke up sweating, my mind struggling to tell dreams from reality. By morning, I was exhausted. Mom asked if I felt sick, but I just shook my head and mumbled something about not sleeping well. She didn't press, but I caught the worried look in her eyes. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, but words seemed too small for something so big and scary. I was afraid she might brush it off or, worse, believe me but not know how to help. The next few days only made things worse. I couldn't step outside without feeling like that figure was lurking just beyond the trees. Sometimes, I'd pace around the edge of the yard, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. I started hearing soft footsteps that didn't match my own. At night, the yard grew unnaturally still, like everything had pulled away from our property. Even the old family dog, usually quick to bark, stayed strangely silent. I asked my grandfather if he had ever seen anything unusual, hoping for some explanation. He usually dismissed ghost stories, but this time he hesitated. I saw a flicker in his eyes, like he was remembering something he didn't want to talk about. He only said quietly that some stories were better left alone and told me not to go too deep into the woods. It was a brief talk, but it left a heavy weight on my mind. That small spark of unease in his eyes was enough to make me believe I'd encountered something very strange. The feeling kept growing each day. I tried to distract myself by doing chores or watching TV with my stepdad, but my mind wouldn't calm down. The house felt tight and suffocating, but stepping outside made my stomach turn. During the day, I would stare at the edge of the woods, half expecting to see something tall and thin slipping between the trees. It was exhausting, always looking over my shoulder. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. One evening, I told my mom and stepdad part of what I'd seen. I left out the worst details, the ragged skin and sharp teeth, but admitted that something in the woods terrified me more than anything else. They exchanged worried looks but didn't dismiss me. Mom promised we'd check it out together, and my stepdad even offered to walk the yard with a flashlight after dark. The idea made my stomach flip, but at least now they knew. I wasn't facing this alone anymore. Still, some nights felt haunted. Sometimes, just as I was falling asleep, I thought I heard my name stretched and twisted into something wrong. It never lasted long, and it only happened in that in-between time between waking and sleeping. I wondered if it was just my mind playing tricks, but it felt too real, like something testing how far it could push me before I broke. Weeks went by, and I tried to believe maybe it was all a mistake or that the figure was gone. But the feeling stayed, like a quiet tension near me all the time. It followed me into my dreams and invaded the everyday world I called home. I was always waiting for the next sign. A glimpse of movement at the window, strange sounds scratching at the door, that eerie echo of my mom's voice through the empty yard. A small part of me was scared that each time it showed up, it would become more daring. That's how life felt from then on. Filled with a dread I couldn't explain, every night haunted by flickers of a nightmare still out there, lurking just beyond where the porch light fades into darkness. The memory of that tall figure shaped every choice I made. My future stretched ahead like a shadow, promising that I would never really leave that moment behind. How could I, when it felt like it left a mark deep inside, pulling me back no matter how hard I tried to run? I woke up earlier than I planned, buzzing with excitement for the day ahead. We packed into the car, my husband in the driver's seat, me riding shotgun, and our dog happily settled in the back, her nose pressed against the window like she couldn't wait to hit the trail. When we arrived at the parking lot, the morning light was soft and calm, shining through the trees in a way that made everything seem fresh and full of promise. I'd heard tales about this waterfall for years, how crowds gathered there to take pictures and swim in the pool beneath it. Part of me preferred quiet, less crowded spots, but as we started walking, I found myself enjoying the gentle buzz of other hikers. Children running, couples laughing, the casual clinking of water bottles in backpacks. It all felt comforting, like a big outdoor gathering. The path to the waterfall was broad and well-traveled. Our dog led the way, ears up and tail wagging so hard I thought she might lift off the ground. Every now and then she'd stop to sniff at a rock or a patch of moss that caught her attention. I chuckled when she locked eyes with a squirrel that chattered back at her from a branch. When we reached the waterfall, the scene looked like a picture from a nature show. Sunlight caught the spray, creating a soft rainbow where the water thundered down into the pool. Families were splashing around, ignoring the cold water, and the air was alive with happy voices. My husband suggested we rest a moment and dip our toes in, but I was eager to explore more. Something about moving beyond the busy spot felt inviting. I wanted to find a quiet piece of wilderness away from the noise. We began climbing a narrow trail that curved around the waterfall, leaving the crowd behind. It was a bit tricky. We had to watch our steps carefully on the wet stones. My husband joked about how with each step we were moving further away from cell phone coverage. At one point, we stopped on a ledge overlooking the falls. The people below looked tiny, like little figures in a painting. Their shouts and laughter were muffled echoes that barely reached us. Ahead, the trail dipped into a thicker part of the forest. The canopy above grew dense, letting in just thin streaks of sunlight that flickered on the ground. It got quieter, too. I noticed the sound of the waterfall fading behind us until all I could hear was our dog's breathing mixed with the crunch of our boots on the earth. I glanced at my husband. He was taking in the view, a bit cautious but still excited about the adventure. The change from the lively chatter near the waterfall to the stillness under the towering trees made me feel alert. Not exactly scared, but more aware of every twig and root. The air felt different too, cooler, maybe heavier. Our dog, unaware of my sudden caution, pulled ahead, following scents that seemed very important to her nose. I tried to push away any uneasy feelings, reminding myself we'd hiked plenty of times without trouble. But as the trail grew narrower and the shadows lengthened, I couldn't ignore a slight edge creeping into my mood. My husband gave me a look that said he felt it too, though neither of us spoke about it. The plan was a quiet walk, and for the most part, it still was. Trees stood tall all around us, the undergrowth damp from a recent rain. We kept going, hoping to find a hidden viewpoint or maybe a secret pool to call our own. But every step took us farther from the safety of the crowd at the waterfall's base. At one point, my husband asked if I'd noticed the birds. That's when we both realized they were gone, or we'd left their songs behind. The silence in the forest felt almost purposeful, like the place was holding secrets it didn't want to share. Even then, our dog seemed happy, bounding ahead full of curiosity. Neither of us wanted to turn back with the day still ahead, and a voice in my head kept insisting there was nothing to fear. Eventually, the trail climbed a little, twisting between thick tree trunks. We were well out of sight from anyone else. I stopped to catch my breath and looked back to make sure we weren't lost. My husband placed a hand on my shoulder, his face a mix of excitement and worry. Our dog barked once. The sound echoed strangely, then went back to sniffing, tail wagging. I thought we were alone out there, free to discover parts of the forest most people didn't bother to see. Little did I know, that calm feeling was about to vanish. If I'd known what was coming, I might have made us turn around then, though I doubt I could have convinced our dog to leave while she was still so upbeat and curious. We were venturing deeper into a part of the woods untouched by crowds. I should have known that untouched didn't always mean safe. I can't say exactly when the forest shifted from peaceful to unsettling, but it happened fast. One minute, our dog was happily padding along, nose to the ground, tail wagging. The next, she froze, jerking the leash so hard I almost fell. I stopped, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. My husband stood a few steps behind me, breathing heavily. The only sound was the pounding of my own blood in my ears. The path ahead looked ordinary, tangled roots and thick bushes, but our dog's stance was clear. Her legs locked stiff, a soft whine escaped her lips, and she refused to move forward. She pulled so hard I worried she'd slip out of her collar. I whispered her name, trying to calm her like I would a scared child. She took a half step back, eyes fixed on something ahead. My husband came closer, voice low. We shared a look that said this wasn't just a stubborn dog. Something was wrong. Time seemed to stretch. The silence pressed down on us as we tried to decide what to do. I strained to hear any noise. A twig snapping, leaves rustling, but nothing. No sounds of animals running off, no signs of life. It was that complete silence that unnerved me the most. Our dog whimpered and tugged us back the way we came. She'd never acted like this before. Usually, she pushed us forward, full of confidence. Something unseen had scared her, and I had no wish to test it. My husband muttered that we should go back, and I agreed, though part of me wanted just one look to see what was out there. My curiosity didn't stand a chance against the look in our dog's eyes. She was terrified. The longer we stayed, the stronger my own panic grew. We had no way to know what might happen if we kept going. The forest had turned into a strange, hostile place in its silence. I nodded slightly and we carefully turned around, trying not to rush or make sudden moves. Our dog practically dragged us downhill, as if the trail behind us was the only safe spot. My heart pounded faster than I could keep up. I felt watched, like something was just out of sight. Every step away felt like escaping a hidden danger we had no business confronting. After a few minutes, we heard the distant roar of the waterfall again. Relief mixed with a lingering fear as the familiar sound grew louder. A small group of hikers came into view. Teenagers chatting loudly, a family carrying towels, normal life just a short distance away from where we'd been. Still, I half expected to see someone or something watching us from the trees. When our dog finally relaxed and started trotting with her usual bounce, I let out a shaky breath. My husband and I spoke only briefly, neither wanting to say aloud the heavy questions in our minds. Were we just imagining things, or had we been too close to something much worse? As we walked back to the crowded parking lot, the cheerful noise of day hikers felt almost strange compared to the quiet dread we'd left behind. I tried to tell myself the forest beyond the waterfall was just normal woods. But every time I looked at our dog, I remembered how strongly she tried to pull us away. Deep down, I knew we'd never see that part of the trail the same way again. The memory was now marked with a kind of fear I couldn't shake. A close call with something I never even saw. I've lived in this little desert town most of my life, where the welcome sign says just over 200 people live here, though I swear some days it feels like even fewer. You'd think a place this empty would be peaceful. No packed streets, no buzzing lights, just miles of sand and jagged hills in every direction. And sure, sometimes it really does feel nice. Early in the morning, you can get this weird calm, like you're the only person left on Earth, and somehow that's okay. But once the quiet stretches too long, that peace turns into something heavier. My brother, sister, and I used to keep busy by hanging around these giant gravel pits not far from our property line. We liked to call it our hidden fort, though anyone could have seen it. It was really just a dusty wasteland filled with holes, scattered stones, and a couple rusted signs warning folks to stay out. Naturally, that made it even more exciting to us. We'd run around playing make-believe, pretending we were lost out in the wild, trying to survive. In the daytime, it felt thrilling. But even then, something about that place was too quiet. Not peaceful, just off. One afternoon, the three of us decided to see how deep we could wander into the pit before our nerves got the best of us. We walked farther than we'd ever gone, trying to shake off the strange unease that came with stepping where nobody else had in a long time. The silence thickened like the desert itself was listening. Then we saw it, a teepee. Someone had used thick logs, freshly chopped based on the pale color, and built a solid structure. But there aren't real trees around here, just dry bushes and the occasional low scrub. The three of us stood there, staring at that weird teepee like it didn't belong, which it didn't. I thought about going closer but couldn't move. I saw the same look on my brother and sister's faces. We all backed up slowly, trying to look unbothered, but we were all shook. A few days later, curiosity won and we went back. We rounded the bend again, and that's when we noticed something dark on the ground in front of the teepee's opening. It was a bird, a crow, or maybe a raven, split perfectly in half. Its wings stretched out like someone had posed it that way. Not a drop of blood anywhere. It looked like it had been dissected with surgical precision. One of my siblings gasped, and I remember wanting to say something comforting, but I couldn't get any words out. We all bolted, acting like we weren't rattled. Later, we tried to show our mom. I had a tiny hope that maybe we just overreacted. But when we went back, it was gone. The teepee had vanished. not a single stick left behind. Mom looked at us like we were just making it up, and that made it worse. All we had was the memory of that bird, and the creeping sense that whoever had built the teepee didn't want strangers snooping around. After that, strange things started to stand out more. Footprints that stopped suddenly. The yard going completely silent at dusk. The feeling that the land itself was aware when I looked out over the desert hills. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but deep down I kept waiting to stumble across another creepy scene. And next time, maybe we wouldn't be able to walk away so easily. I always used to love looking at the stars out here. The sky was so wide and open, like a black canvas scattered with glitter. On quiet nights, I'd climb into the back of our old truck, lie down with a hoodie under my head, and just watch the sky. Shooting stars, the distant sound of cows, shouts from the neighbor's ranch. All of it was part of the rhythm out here. But one night, that rhythm changed. The cows started mooing around the usual time, but something shifted. One cow started making noises that sounded too much like a person. A drawn-out, awful sound that carried through the cold air. The noise got louder or more focused until I couldn't ignore it. My brain tried to find a reason. Maybe just an echo, maybe an animal in distress. But my gut told me to get inside. I climbed out of the truck and hurried back in, nerves firing. A few weeks later, we went on our yearly camping trip up in the Blue Ridge foothills. The kind of place with dirt trails and thick woods, perfect for disconnecting. My dog, Benny, came too. Once we got camp set up and the others went to gather firewood, I wandered off looking for larger logs. Benny walked beside me, nose to the ground. We rounded a bend, and suddenly the sound of my family faded away. That's when I felt it, a pull, not like a hand, but something nudging me to leave the path. It felt ridiculous even thinking it, but it was hard to resist. A whisper in my head, urging me to take just a few more steps. If Benny hadn't yanked his leash just then, I might have done it. He jolted me out of it with one strong pull. I snapped out of the daze, turned back, and rushed to the others like I'd just been lost in thought. I didn't tell them. No way. The rest of the trip, the tension stayed with me. Every rustling branch, every breeze through the trees made Benny sit up alert, ears stiff. I kept thinking something would jump out at us. We barely slept that week. Then winter came, and one night our husky took off into the dark. The fog was thick and the cold was sharp. My mom, my little sister, and I followed his tracks through the drifts, calling his name. Eventually, we realized we needed the truck. I volunteered to go back with Benny while they kept searching on foot. The walk felt endless. The fog was so thick I could barely see. Snow muted every sound. That's when I heard it, a voice, low and steady, floating out from somewhere in the fields. It wasn't English, not Spanish, nothing I recognized. Almost like a chant, but it didn't match anything I'd ever heard in church or on TV. It didn't even sound like it came from far away. It was just there. My chest tightened. It wasn't just noise, it was calling. I froze. Benny stood still beside me. Even though the cold bit at my skin, I almost stepped toward the sound. It was like a hook pulling at my stomach. Then Benny yanked hard again. I followed, stumbling after him, until the blurry outline of our house showed through the mist. I got into the truck, locked the doors, and just sat there, staring out at the white windows. I didn't know if I was shivering from the cold or something else. Then I remembered Mom and my sister were still out there, so I forced myself to drive in the direction they'd gone. We never did catch the husky that night. He came back in the morning like nothing had happened, tail wagging like he'd had a blast. I couldn't stop thinking about the voice, what it was, where it came from. It echoed in my mind for days, especially at night when the wind picked up and the desert felt like it was creeping closer. Now when I look out the windows after dark, I pay attention. I listen. If the usual sounds aren't there, cows lowing, dogs barking, wind rustling through the wire fences, then I know something might be out there watching again, waiting. And this time, I'm not so sure it'll leave quietly. Benny seems to sense it too. That's enough reason for me to keep every bolt locked and every porch light burning once the sun dips low. When I was a kid, my family was big on spending time outside. My dad was in the military, stationed at a base near Ogden, Idaho, so we used to visit a nearby canyon a lot, especially during the fall months when all the leaves turned bright yellow and red. The drive took us around an hour, but the unpaved road that led into the canyon always made me nervous. It stuck close to the rock on one side, and the other side just dropped off into a steep ravine. Sometimes two cars would meet going opposite directions and have to squeeze past each other, inches away from the edge. I'd look out my window and see tiny trees way down below, and I remember just feeling cold all over. There's one trip I remember more than any of the others. It was sometime in the late 90s, maybe 98 or 99. I was excited because this time we were going to stay in a tent, which didn't happen often. My dad usually had back pain, so most of the time we'd just go out for the day or stay in a cabin. But this time we had borrowed an old tent from someone at my mom's work. It was one of those boxy-looking ones from the late 70s. We all loaded up the car, me, my parents, my two younger brothers, and our two dogs. We made it to the site sometime in the late afternoon. It was near a small stream, and the air smelled like pine needles and wood smoke. The tent went up without too much trouble. The dogs chased each other around while we laughed and got the fire going. We roasted some hot dogs and sat around as the sun started to disappear behind the hills. Eventually, it got dark enough that we put out the fire and crawled into our sleeping bags. I remember feeling really happy as I listened to the bubbling of the creek and the wind in the trees. But sometime in the night, I woke up. One of the dogs was making this deep, rumbling growl. The fur on his back was standing up. At first, I thought it might be a rabbit or something. We'd seen a couple hopping around earlier, so I didn't think much of it. But then I heard this crunching noise outside. The sound of something walking, heavy enough to snap twigs. Someone, or something, was moving around out there near our tent. I froze. I felt like I couldn't move. My breathing got shallow. I listened closely as the steps got nearer. Whoever it was circled around the tent, slow and steady. The dog's growl got louder and more serious, but I was too scared to even sit up. I could tell someone was checking out our things, maybe looking through our stuff, maybe pulling on the car door because I heard it rattle. It was locked, thankfully. I kept thinking, was this someone from another campsite? Maybe a hiker who'd gotten lost? Or was it someone with bad intentions? Someone who wanted to do something worse? The footsteps came right up next to the tent again. I shut my eyes tight and just hoped they'd leave. The dog let out a sharper growl, and then everything went quiet. After a few seconds, I heard the steps again, this time moving away, quicker than before. I didn't move. I just laid there, my heart pounding in my chest so hard I thought it would wake everyone up. I'm not sure how long I stayed like that, just staring at the roof of the tent. At some point, I heard my dad whisper. He'd been awake too. I could tell by the way he whispered that he was worried. He didn't say anything at first, just waited a little while longer. Then he quietly got up, woke my mom and brothers, and said we were leaving. Nobody asked why. We packed fast. No talking, just grabbing stuff and stuffing it back into bags. We took the tent down in the dark, using flashlights. The dog stuck close to us but kept looking around, clearly still alert. By the time we were back in the car and driving out of the canyon, it was around 1 a.m. The dirt road felt even darker than before, like the shadows were thicker. I kept staring out the window, half expecting to see someone walking along the road or hiding behind a tree. My dad finally said he'd seen some vehicles earlier that looked like they were full of college kids, maybe headed up to party or mess around in the woods. He said maybe it was one of them who'd wandered over to our site. But the way he said it made me think he didn't believe it either. We got back home without anything else happening, but none of us really slept the rest of that night. I lay in bed for hours, just replaying it in my head. I kept wondering, was it someone just trying to find help? Someone trying to rob us? Or maybe someone who lived out there watching campers come and go, waiting for the right time to get close? I still don't know. But even now, all these years later, if I'm out in the woods and I hear that same kind of footstep crunch, crunch on dry leaves or twigs, my whole body tenses up, just for a second, long enough to remember. Back in the mid-1990s, I worked as a forest mapper in a remote stretch of terrain called Arkloon Provincial Preserve, tucked away in northern Alberta, Canada. The job seemed simple enough on paper. Map the area, tag specific trees, record environmental shifts, but out in the wilderness it was far from straightforward. The preserve covered over 4,000 square kilometers of thick woods, sharp ridges, and marshy basins that could easily swallow a person whole. I'd been doing the job for years and had grown to appreciate the solitude. Just me and miles of wilderness. Late August of 1995 found me deeper into the backcountry than I'd ever been. I carried a full load of gear, and the closest road was nearly a 4-day walk. The nearest base station was even farther out. I was entirely alone, which is how I preferred it. The day started like any other. I woke early, packed up my small tent, and hiked north through a thick growth of pine. I'd been tracking the curve of a small drainage line when I noticed something strange ahead. The trees didn't look right. They were angled weirdly, leaning outward, as if pushed by some great pressure. I stopped and adjusted my gear. Looking closer through the branches, I noticed a clearing. A wide, uneven circle that looked like it had been punched out of the forest. I stepped in. My boots sank slightly into the ground, which felt too soft. That's when I saw it. Everything inside that circle, trees, bushes, soil, had turned a pale, grayish white. Not burned, not covered in frost, just drained of all color. The trees looked like skeletons, their bark flaking off in dry layers. The ground crunched under each step, brittle and unnerving. I'd come across all sorts of sights in the woods over the years. Burn marks, beetle damage, even a site a grizzly had torn apart. But nothing like this. Despite the knot tightening in my gut, I moved closer to the center. There, at the heart of the clearing, was a shallow crater. No more than 3 feet across and maybe 2 feet deep. Just a slight dip in the ashen soil. I stood over it, staring. There was no sign of an impact. No stones, no metal, nothing scorched. Just an empty hollow in the center of a dead white patch of forest. What struck me most was the silence. No wind, no birds, not even the usual rustle of leaves. It was still in a way I'd never experienced before, and that stillness crawled up my spine like a cold hand. I couldn't explain it, but something about that place felt deeply wrong, like I was being watched by something that didn't want me there. I shifted, uneasy, and reached into my bag for my old film camera. My fingers shook while I removed the lens cap, but I managed to take a set of photos, some wide shots of the clearing and several close-ups of the crater. With every click of the shutter, I felt more unsettled. This wasn't a normal find. This was something I needed to report, something that someone much smarter than me would want to study. When I was done, I packed the camera away, threw my bag over my shoulder, and started the long hike out. I didn't stop looking back until the strange patch of forest was behind a thick wall of trees. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation, but the unease clung to me. The hike back took nearly 7 hours. I had originally planned to camp for one more night, but after seeing that place, I wanted solid walls around me. At first, the trek was normal, just sore shoulders from the weight of my gear. Then came the pounding headache. I figured it was stress or dehydration and took a long drink from my canteen. But it didn't help. My stomach started to cramp in waves, growing worse with every step. By the time I reached the last ridge overlooking the field station, I was soaked in sweat. I leaned against a tree, trying to catch my breath. For a moment, I thought the worst had passed. Then suddenly I vomited, hard. It was like someone had flipped a switch in my gut. I wiped my mouth, tasted bile, and realized I might be seriously ill. I stumbled the final stretch to the station, and when I burst through the door, the ranger on duty, Liam, I think his name was, looked up and froze. I must have looked awful, pale, soaked, maybe even a bit of puke still on my shirt. He grabbed the radio before I could say a word. He called for emergency pickup. I didn't hear the rest. My legs gave out, and I dropped to the floor, vomiting again as Liam rushed over. My vision went dark. The next thing I knew, I was in a speeding ambulance, drenched in sweat, with an oxygen mask strapped to my face. The paramedics asked questions. Where had I been? What had I eaten? Had anything bitten me? I muttered something about the white patch and the hollow, but the words came out jumbled. I think I passed out again because the next thing I remember, I was lying in a hospital bed. Everything was white, walls, blankets, machines, and I felt hollow, like all the strength had been drained from my body. When a nurse noticed I was awake, she called in a doctor. He looked worn out with thin wireframe glasses. I was relieved when he said I was going to recover. According to him, they believed it was a nasty viral bug, likely from an insect bite. They'd put me on fluids and antivirals, and I'd be out in a few days. I nodded, but my mind went back to that clearing. It wasn't a bug bite. I told him about the white trees and the crater. He listened and jotted down some notes, said he'd mention it, but I could tell he didn't believe me. People who are out of it say all kinds of things in hospitals. I can't blame him. They treat what's in front of them. I was discharged after a few days, still weak, but on my feet. When I got back to headquarters, I handed off the camera. My supervisor, a no-nonsense guy named Reese, asked me to explain what I'd seen. I told him everything. Then I waited in the break room while the technician developed the film. Back then, some ranger stations had small photo labs. After about an hour and a half, the tech came back out. His face was blank. He spread the prints across the table, and my stomach dropped. Every photo of that site was a useless blur, not overexposed or underlit, just static, fuzzy white blotches. The rest of the pictures, ones from earlier in the trip, looked fine. But the clearing, the crater, the trees, gone. Just smears of nothing. I stared, fists clenching the edge of the table. The tech mumbled something about a faulty roll. Reese didn't say much, just told me to take some time and not push myself. Nobody called me a liar, but I could feel the doubt. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. I knew what they thought, that the fever had cooked my brain, and I'd imagined the whole thing. I tried explaining the timing. I was fine before I reached that spot, sick after I left it, but without evidence, my words didn't carry much weight. Eventually, Reese asked me to let it go. He said it was making the others uncomfortable. So I went back to work, marking trees, updating maps, writing reports. It helped a little to pretend I was over it, but I wasn't, couldn't be. Every time I was out on a new route, I kept scanning for that strange white hue through the trees. Part of me wanted to find the place again, to mark it properly and show the others. But the other part didn't want to risk getting sick or worse, dragging someone else into it. So I kept quiet. I started telling the new hires to stay away from anything weird looking in the woods. They thought it was a joke, just some veteran ranger messing with the rookies. But I meant every word. The forest isn't just trees and mud. Sometimes it hides things that shouldn't be there, things that make you sick, things that don't belong. I eventually retired in 2004 and moved farther south to a quiet town just outside of Dawson Creek. The nightmares faded with time, but the memory didn't. I'm an old man now, pushing 70, and my hands shake worse than they did back then. But my memory's still sharp. Sometimes I take out that envelope from my desk, the one with the smudged, useless photos, and I look at those pale streaks and wonder. I've read up on similar phenomena over the years. The meteor theory doesn't hold water. No rocks, no fire damage, and if it had been radiation or some chemical agent, I figure the doctors would have spotted it during their tests. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a simple explanation, but I've never been able to find one. I'm not a fan of UFO talk or space stuff. There's probably a logical reason for what happened. I just don't know what it is. And maybe that's all right. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But if I ever stumble across that spot again, if I ever see that pale clearing through the trees, I'm not getting closer. I'm turning right around and walking the other way. I was part of a search crew assigned to a case in the Wenatchee National Forest during the summer of 1984. The call came through late on a Monday night, just as I was wrapping up at the station. The missing person was Roger Holbrook, a regular outdoorsman from the area who had gone off on one of his solo hikes and hadn't returned. His wife waited until Sunday evening before calling anyone, thinking maybe he just decided to stay out an extra day. But when Monday came and he still hadn't shown up, She reached out to us with a detailed rundown of what he had on him. The last place he'd been seen was a trailhead near the Elam River. He had told her his plan was to hike up to a ridge about 8 miles north. At first, it sounded like a simple assignment. Roger knew those woods better than most, and we had a clear location to start from. I was almost certain we'd have him back before nightfall, but that particular operation ended up being far from normal. Along with the sheriff's office and about 3 dozen local volunteers, we gathered near the trailhead at first light on Tuesday. Everyone geared up with radios, med kits, maps, rope, and flashlights. We split into smaller teams, dividing the whole search area into blocks. My group covered the western part closest to the river. The others branched out east. The strategy was to move steadily north, reach the ridge by nightfall, and bring Roger back. At exactly 5:43 a.m., we started walking. The first few hours passed slowly with not much to see. We stayed sharp, scanning for broken twigs, trampled brush, or any trace that he'd walked through. We called out his name now and then, but the woods stayed quiet, too quiet. Around midday, someone from my team came through on the radio. He'd spotted something. I changed course and hiked half a mile east to meet up with them. When I arrived, the group was staring up into the trees. About 30 feet above us, tangled in the branches, was a backpack. It was ripped open, hanging there like it had been thrown with force. Straps dangling, some items had fallen out and were scattered below. From the look of it, we could tell it belonged to Roger. His wife had mentioned it specifically. A dark green Keltie with a stitched orange emblem on one side. A teammate of mine, Mark, volunteered to climb. He got a rope ready and scrambled up, while the rest of us waited below. The tree itself was narrow, and the limbs were too thin to support much weight. But the pack had landed there anyway, lodged as if someone had hurled it hard enough to stick. Once Mark got it down, we checked it over closely. The material had deep slices through it. Not bite marks or clawing, but long, straight tears like a knife or sharp tool had cut it. Inside, Roger's canteen was cracked open, leaking, and a sandwich had been half-eaten and mashed into the dirt. No blood yet. That came later. Roughly 2 hours after that, another one of our team radioed in. She'd found one of Roger's boots in a small clearing. I walked over and sure enough, there it was, just like the kind his wife said he wore. Dark brown leather with thick laces. It stood upright, not scuffed or torn. No blood, no signs of a struggle. It looked like someone had simply stepped out of it. We flagged the location and kept going, expecting to find the second boot nearby. We didn't. An hour later, a group searching almost 2 miles away on the far eastern border called in with a disturbing update. They'd found the other boot. This one wasn't empty. Roger's foot was still in it. It had been severed just above the ankle. The break was rough, not clean, and the skin had been torn in a jagged, messy way. A few flies buzzed around it. The blood was still sticky, meaning it had been dropped there recently. The other group took pictures and bagged the foot. After that, the entire forest felt different, heavier. We'd handled injuries before, hunters with gun wounds, hikers who'd fallen, but this wasn't that. A bear might maul someone, sure, but a bear wouldn't separate boots by 2 miles and leave a single foot so deliberately. Something about it felt too arranged. We tightened our search after that. The grid became narrower, and soon we started spotting blood. The first smear I noticed was on a tree, about eye level. It looked like a thumbprint, no bigger than a coin. Then someone else found more on a pine a short distance away, higher up. Another team member pointed out droplets dotting a fallen log, like they'd been flung there. We started tagging every blood spot we found. It didn't take long to realize there was no order to it. The blood was everywhere, not pooled or smeared in a way that pointed to a body being dragged, just scattered. Small spatters on bark, tiny stains on rocks, a speck here, another one there. It was like someone had dipped a rag in blood and whipped it around at random. By late afternoon, we had gone through nearly half of our designated grid. Still nothing beyond what we'd already found. His gear, his boots, and scattered blood. No body, no clothes, no sign of a struggle that made sense. Fog began to drift in as the sun dropped. We grouped closer together, spoke less, and just kept moving, looking. We eventually set up a makeshift base camp near the northern ridge. The plan was to rest a bit and resume at first light. I didn't sleep much. The forest was too silent. No wind, no night birds, no animals. Just a strange stillness that pressed in. Around midnight, I heard a snap, a branch breaking, sharp and close, maybe 80 or 90 yards out. I sat up fast and swept my flashlight around, trying to spot anything between the trees. But I didn't see movement. Nothing stirred. I stayed alert until my shift ended. It stayed that kind of quiet, the wrong kind, like even the squirrels and birds were hiding. I got a few hours of sleep after that, but it didn't help. Morning didn't ease my nerves. We broke camp and continued north, following the trail of blood. Kept going. Smears on trunks, dots on leaves, marks that had to be at least 10 feet up on trees that didn't have any branches low enough to reach. One streak on a pine had clearly been left recently. The blood looked fresh, wet to the touch. I marked the spot and kept moving. A teammate found a circle of droplets on a rock, and another saw a red streak across a moss-covered log. We stopped trying to make sense of the pattern. It didn't have one. By noon, we reached the edge of our search zone, between what we'd found. His foot, the blood, the torn pack. We all quietly accepted that Roger wasn't going to be found alive. We gave it everything, covered every foot of the assigned area, but nothing else turned up. On the afternoon of the third day, the search was officially shut down. He was gone. No one could lose that much blood and keep walking. We contacted the authorities, packed our gear, and hiked out. As we reached the trailhead, I paused and looked back. The trees stood still again. Fog was drifting through them. Roger had vanished somewhere beyond the map's edge. The paperwork listed it as a wild animal attack. A bear, most likely. That was what made sense on paper, the shredded backpack, the severed limb. But I didn't buy it. No bear could toss a bag that high onto thin branches too weak to hold weight. No bear spreads blood across miles like some kind of message. I've seen bear attacks. They're brutal, lots of mess, broken bones, shredded flesh. But this was different. The official record said Roger Holbrook died during a hike. His body was never recovered. That case became one of only a few failed searches I was part of in the 1980s. Most of us left field work not long after. I took a quieter job. Others just moved on. But I never stopped thinking about that pack in the tree. The image of it, torn open, dangling out of reach, still sticks in my mind. So does the foot still inside the boot, left for us to find? One guy from the team, Paul, kept in touch for a while. Years later, I asked him what he thought really happened. All he said was, "We didn't find him because he wasn't there to be found." And I knew what he meant. I just didn't agree. Whatever had taken Roger didn't leave him behind. It took him apart, piece by piece, and scattered what was left through the forest. I think part of him stayed there. I know it did because of how fresh that blood was on the second day. Another teammate, Anna, quit search and rescue the following year. She moved inland, away from the trees, and never gave anyone her new address. Sarah disappeared from our circle too. Not missing, just gone. No forwarding info. Mark stuck it out longer but went quiet and started drinking more. I heard he got a job with the Forest Service, which was ironic. We didn't speak much after that mission. None of US did, but we all carried it. I kept the map from that operation. The one we marked with red XS to track every blood spot. They stretch across the grid like a web. I don't pull it out often, but when I do, I always feel that same cold chill run through me. Roger never made it back, but something else was out there. Something that left just enough behind to make sure we knew it was real. Something we never went looking for again. Some years back now, my friend Caleb and I went backpacking along a stretch of trail near the Northern California coast, around an area they call the Forgotten Shoreline. We'd been moving since around 7 in the morning, just following the path, cracking jokes about stuff from our jobs, and soaking up the quiet. By noon, my legs were starting to feel heavy, and I could see that Caleb was dragging a bit too. We decided to stop and figure out exactly where we were. There was this small open spot just off the path with a broad, flat stone that looked good for a break. I set my pack down, pulled out my water bottle, and took a big gulp while Caleb pulled out the map. He was always the one better with navigation, so I let him handle that while I caught my breath. He was sort of mumbling under his breath, following a line on the map with his finger. When it happened, a massive shadow moved across the clearing, just swept over us, like someone had hit a switch and dimmed the sun. It wasn't like a passing cloud either. It was wide enough to blanket the entire clearing. I remember freezing right there, water dripping down my chin as I stared upward. But the sky above us was still crystal clear, bright blue, no clouds anywhere. Caleb must have seen it too because he suddenly stopped talking and looked up fast, just as the light came back like nothing had happened. He said something real uneasy, but I didn't answer right away. I was too busy scanning the trees and sky for anything that could explain it. But there wasn't a thing up there. No birds, no aircraft. This was back before drones were everywhere too. I couldn't think of a single thing that could cast a shadow that big, let alone one that could move so quick and not make a sound. It didn't glide like a bird, it felt like it moved the air. Then came the wind. It hit suddenly, sharp and cold. It shook the branches and pushed up dust off the trail. It didn't feel like normal wind. It felt like it followed whatever had passed overhead, like it came with it somehow. My skin broke out in goosebumps, and I saw Caleb go pale. He slowly lowered the map, spinning in place, checking every direction. "You saw that too, right?" I didn't say anything. I just nodded. What else was there to do? We stood there, probably for a couple of minutes, just listening, waiting for something. My chest was pounding, and I could hear Caleb breathing beside me. Everything around us had gone dead quiet. No birds, no insects, just silence. Like the woods were holding their breath. I kept thinking something was going to drop down from the trees or come back through the sky, but nothing happened. The sun was shining again, same as before, like it had never left. "We should move," I finally said. He didn't argue. He grabbed the map, shoved it into his bag, and we took off. We didn't talk about where to go. We both just knew we were leaving, fast. We didn't bother staying on the path. We backtracked straight through the undergrowth, brushing past branches and ducking under low limbs. I kept watching the sky, expecting the shadow to return at any second. I could feel Caleb doing the same. Every breeze, every sound made me jump. I had this creeping feeling that whatever had passed over us wasn't done. It took us maybe an hour to get back to the trailhead, though it felt like it took twice as long. I was overheated, and my shirt was stuck to my back from all the sweat by the time we reached the small gravel lot. Caleb's old Chevy was right where we'd left it, and I don't think I've ever felt so relieved to see a dented, sun-faded truck in my life. We tossed our gear in the bed and climbed inside. For a long moment, we just sat there, trying to slow our breathing, looking straight out at the woods. Eventually, Caleb broke the silence. "Maybe it was just a bird," he said, "like a hawk flying low. Shadows can look big when they hit the ground right." He didn't sound convinced, more like he was hoping, saying it would make it true. "Yeah," I replied, giving a weak nod, though I didn't buy it either. "And the wind was probably just random." "Sure," he said as he started the engine, his voice a little lighter, like saying it out loud was helping him believe it. "We're probably just letting our imaginations run wild," he added. I wanted to believe that too. I really did. A bird could explain it. Something large, like a vulture or eagle, catching the sunlight just right. Maybe the breeze was just the weather shifting. Stuff like that happens all the time out in the woods. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. That shadow had been huge, solid, more than a vague blur. And it didn't move like a bird. It moved smooth and fast, like it was built for silence. It didn't feel like anything I'd ever seen. The ride back into town was mostly quiet, with country songs playing softly on the radio. Every now and then, Caleb glanced at me like he was trying to see if I was still rattled. And I was. When we got back to my place, he didn't come in like he usually did after a hike. No beer, no chatting about the day. He just said he'd catch me later and drove off quick, like he needed to put some distance between himself and whatever had happened out there. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about that shadow, about the way the wind hit, and how the woods just seemed to stop living for a minute. I told myself we were just shaken up, that we imagined something out of nothing, but I couldn't really believe it. Weeks went by. We didn't bring it up again. Life carried on: work, bills, errands. I went hiking again eventually, but never on that trail. And nothing strange happened after that. But still, every time I'm outside now, especially on clear days, I find myself checking the sky. I don't know what I think I'll see, but I always look. That shadow's still there in my mind. I still get that feeling, whatever made it wasn't just some bird. One night, I went down an online rabbit hole. I typed stuff like giant sky shadow and unexplained forest events into a search bar and scrolled for hours. Most of it was junk, grainy videos, stories about UFOs, cryptids, and weird government test flights. None of it seemed quite right. Whatever Caleb and I experienced didn't feel like any of those things. It felt like something that didn't belong at all. I closed the laptop after a while, feeling kind of dumb for even searching. Caleb and I still hang out sometimes, but we don't hike much anymore. It's not like we decided to stop. It just sort of faded out. I think we both know why. Neither of us wants to admit it, but that day changed something. There's a quiet understanding between us now, like an unspoken pact. We don't bring it up, but I think about it more than I'd like to admit. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, circling above those trees, waiting for someone else to walk into that clearing. I'll never forget how small I felt that day, standing there, staring up at an empty sky, waiting for something that never showed itself. I don't know if it was dangerous or just there, but deep down, I'm certain it wasn't normal. By the time 2015 rolled around, my buddy Trevor and I had already been backpacking partners for a long time. We'd wandered through the thick woods of Northern California and Southern Oregon, roasted under the scorching heat of deserts out in Arizona and Nevada, and climbed the rugged Sierra Mountains together more than once. But our next goal was something bigger, an area called the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. Though most folks just call it the Selway, our plan was simple. Hike in, set up camp, and see what this remote place had to throw at us. We packed up our gear, threw everything into the back of my truck, and made the long drive from the Bay Area up into central Idaho. It was supposed to be a long but straightforward backcountry trip. Took us 2 full days to get there. We drove north along the interstate, then east deep into Idaho. Eventually, the land around us opened up into the vast sprawl of the Selway, more than 1 million acres of wild, untouched ground. It made everything we'd done before look small. We left the truck in a gravel parking area near the middle fork of the Clearwater River. There was a worn sign warning about bears and wildfires. We pulled our backpacks from the trunk, loaded down with food, a tent, sleeping bags, water filters, and everything else we needed. At that point, those packs were basically our whole lives. The first day out, we followed the main trail, hiking through tall pines. It was quiet out there, but in a peaceful way. We managed to make it close to 9 miles before stopping beside a stream right around dusk. That's where we set up camp. Day 2 was more of the same. We moved further into the forest, winding through valleys and climbing over ridges. The deeper we went, the more overgrown the trail got. In some places, it disappeared altogether under thick brush. We didn't talk much, just chewed on trail mix and checked the maps now and then to stay on course. That night, we pitched our tent on a flat bit of ground, heated up some instant ramen, and collapsed into sleep. 18 miles into the trip, and we were feeling good, tired, but steady. On the 3rd day, though, something changed. There was a kind of restlessness that built up between us. Trails were fine for day hikers, but we were there for something wilder. So when Trevor suggested we cut away from the marked path and go off-route into the untamed forest, I didn't argue. That's what we came for. The change was immediate. The trees were thicker, with trunks wide as barrels and roots spreading underfoot like ropes. Moss coated everything, dimming the daylight and making the forest floor feel soft and spongy underfoot. We had to slow down a lot, climbing over dead logs and avoiding hidden holes. It was tougher going, but it felt worth it, like we had stepped into a forgotten world. Then Trevor suddenly stopped walking. He tilted his head, like he was picking up on something strange. A moment later, I heard it too, a low humming sound, constant, steady, and definitely not natural. It didn't sound like wind or water. It sounded mechanical. Neither of us said anything. We just looked at each other, then followed the sound. As we got closer, the hum grew louder. After maybe 5 minutes of picking our way through dense underbrush, we came into a clearing and saw it. A bunker. It was built into the side of a low hill, partially hidden by trees. The steel door hung crooked in the frame. The concrete walls were marked up with scratches and symbols. Circles, lines, and zigzagging marks that didn't seem to mean anything. The hum was coming from inside. When we were close enough, we could tell it was music, loud, distorted, metallic music with screaming vocals. The door was slightly open, just enough for the noise to spill out. We both froze a few feet from the entrance. The music was aggressive, maybe death metal or something like that. But it wasn't the music that made us pause. It was the thought of who might be inside. Trevor gave me a look. There was a slim chance this was just some group of metalheads having a weird party in a forgotten place. But what if it wasn't? What if they were here, this deep in the middle of nowhere, for reasons that weren't good? I glanced back at Trevor and tilted my head slightly toward the woods, silently saying, "Let's get out of here." He nodded. We turned around, eager to put distance between us and whatever was in that bunker before it got dark. We didn't want to find out who was down there or what they were doing. But we'd only gone maybe a few hundred yards when we were found. We were walking and quietly talking about the bunker, who could have built it and why, when two guys stepped out of the woods ahead of us. It was like they had been waiting. They wore full camo, their faces hidden behind masks. Each one held a rifle, maybe an AK variant, barrels pointed down but held tightly. My stomach dropped. Trevor and I stopped moving. I could hear his breathing beside me. I knew he was scanning them the same way I was. The two men didn't say anything at first. They just stared at us through the narrow slits of their face coverings, while the bunker's music throbbed faintly behind us through the trees. Then one of them raised his gun slightly and said, "On your knees, hands up." His voice was cold. No emotion, no room for discussion. I looked at Trevor. His hands twitched toward his backpack straps. We knew our pistols were inside our packs, buried and unreachable. We were outnumbered and badly outgunned. I began to slowly lift my hands, trying to buy a few seconds, when Trevor suddenly dropped his pack and bolted. The thud of his bag hitting the ground snapped me out of it. I yanked my straps off, dropped the weight, and sprinted after him. A shot rang out above us, loud and sharp. Bark exploded from a tree nearby, spraying me with splinters. I ducked and ran harder, dodging trees, my legs burning. Behind us, someone shouted, "Stop shooting! We need them alive!" For a second, I thought the chase might ease up, but then more gunfire followed. The bullets hit the dirt around our feet. They weren't trying to kill us, just slow us down, maybe wound us. Trevor was ahead of me, darting between trunks. I stayed right behind him. The shots eventually stopped, but we didn't. We ran for what felt like miles, though it was probably just 1 or 2. Finally, we stopped. Both of us were gasping, soaked in sweat, barely able to stand. We listened, nothing. No voices, no gunfire, no sign of anyone following us. But we'd lost everything. Our bags were gone. So was all our food, our gear, our maps. Everything we needed. There wasn't much choice, we had to keep moving. That first night was terrible. No tent, no sleeping bags. The cold set in fast. We huddled against a log, pulling our jackets tight. I barely slept. I expected to hear footsteps or see figures approaching with rifles. But the night passed quietly. Trevor didn't sleep either. We just waited for the morning. When the sun finally came up, we were starving. We came across some half-ripe berries on a bush and ate what we could. They were bitter and stained our hands, but we knew enough not to eat anything dangerous. Using the sun for direction, we tried to move south, hoping to make it back to the car. My head was pounding. My boots were tearing into my heels, but we had no option but to walk. All day we hiked, stopping only to scoop water from a stream with our hands. That night, we found a shallow dip under a rocky ledge to rest. Still no fire, too risky, and we had nothing to cook anyway. Sleep came in short bursts. Every rustle in the brush woke me. Day 3 was the hardest. My legs felt like blocks of concrete. We found a few more berries, and Trevor dug up some roots he recognized. But it wasn't nearly enough. My stomach felt like it was folding in on itself. I lost track of time and just stared at Trevor's back as we pushed on. He wasn't doing much better. We didn't talk. Not about the bunker, not about the men, not about anything. When we finally hit a dirt road, I almost dropped to my knees. It was barely wide enough for a vehicle and full of deep ruts, but it was a road. We followed it for what felt like forever. Then we saw it, a ranger station. It was a squat wooden building with a rusted truck parked out front. We must have looked awful. Muddy, scratched, faces sunken in. A ranger with a gray beard and a faded Forest Service badge opened the door, took one look at us and said, "Let me get you something warm to drink." We told him everything. The hidden bunker, the odd symbols carved into the walls, the men with the weapons who chased us. He called the authorities, and officers showed up an hour later to take our statements. They sent rangers to check the site. We were hopeful, but when they returned, they said the place was empty. Just bare concrete and those weird markings. No people, no gear, no trace of our packs. The police didn't seem shocked. One of them said the Selway had a reputation. Groups with guns sometimes camped out there, trained, partied, or worse. He said we were lucky. Those kinds of people didn't usually like witnesses. They told us not to go back. Not to that part of the wilderness anyway. That was it. No arrests, no follow-up, just a warning. On the drive home, Trevor barely said a word. He stared out the window the whole time. I gripped the wheel, wiped. A few years ago, I made the decision to go on a solo hike. It wasn't something I usually did, but I'd been feeling trapped lately, like I just needed to step outside and breathe for a bit. I grabbed my keys, tossed a bottle of water into my backpack, and drove out to a trail I'd heard some things about. It was about an hour and a half from where I lived, hidden away in some woods I hadn't explored before. The drive was quiet, just me, the low sound of the engine, and trees rushing past on either side. I pulled into a small dirt lot near the start of the trail, parked, locked the car, and started walking. But that's where things start to blur. The next thing I can clearly remember is being back behind the wheel, driving toward home with the sun already sinking in the sky. Like a big chunk of time had just disappeared. Everything in between was gone. It was like someone had taken scissors to a roll of film, snipped out the middle, and glued the two ends together. That night, I sat on my old couch, beer in hand, though I barely took a sip. I kept trying to piece together what had happened. I remembered pulling into that parking lot. I remembered the crunch of gravel under my tires and the old, worn-out wooden sign with the trail's name carved into it. I even had a quick flash of walking into the woods, my boots hitting the path, trees all around. There's this one tiny image that keeps coming back to me. Just a brief moment of me walking in the woods, everything around me still and peaceful. But that's all. The rest is just a blank space in my head until I was suddenly back in my car, driving away like it was any normal day. It really unsettled me. I kept asking myself what could have happened out there, but nothing came to mind. The following morning, I called off work. My head felt heavy and foggy, and I couldn't get myself to focus. I sat around staring at my hiking boots by the front door. They were covered in dried-up mud, a few pine needles still tangled in the laces. That was proof I had been out there, but I had no memory of walking through any mud or brushing past pine trees. I started to wonder if maybe I had fallen and hit my head, so I went to see a doctor. He poked and prodded, asked a few questions, tested my reflexes, and checked my eyes. He said everything looked normal. No signs of a head injury, no concussion, nothing out of the ordinary. He told me to come back if anything like that ever happened again. I told him I would, but the whole way back from that appointment, I felt uneasy. Deep in my gut, something didn't sit right. That evening, I found myself sitting on the couch with the TV on, but I wasn't really paying attention. I just sat there thinking. It was like I was waiting for my brain to suddenly snap something into place. I thought maybe I had just zoned out during the hike. Like when you drive somewhere you've been 100 times and can't remember the ride. But this felt different. This wasn't just a moment or two. It was several hours of nothing. Like someone had stolen a part of my day. I ended up grabbing my phone and looking up the trail. It was now called Birch Hollow Loop, some old route not many people seem to visit anymore. I went through a few online hiking forums, looking for anything useful. Most of what I saw was basic stuff. People mentioning deer sightings or complaining about how overgrown the trail was. Then I found one thread, way down at the bottom of a long list of posts. It was from a guy who said he'd gone out there a couple of summers before me. He talked about feeling strange the whole time, like something in the forest wasn't right. He mentioned coming across a stretch of trail where the trees looked weird, really thin and twisted, like they were sick. He didn't talk about memory loss or anything like that, but reading what he wrote about those trees stuck with me. I kept thinking about it too much, and eventually I just shut the phone off and left it alone. The days started to blur into weeks, and I did my best to forget about it. I never told anyone, not friends, not family. I mean, what would I even say? Hey, I went for a walk and forgot the entire thing? They'd probably think I was losing my mind. But I'd catch myself staring off into space sometimes, completely zoned out. Every now and then I'd get that same sinking feeling, like it was all about to happen again, and I'd start to panic. But thankfully, it hasn't. Still, I can't shake the thought that whatever caused that lost time, it started on that trail.